I'm So Lonely Baby. It's a Saturday morning, November 30, 2024. Peter Boyles and Kelly Michaels, all of us together. Now, this is the music that changes everybody. Coming up, Elvis and the Colonel, 710 KNUS. We are Denver's talk station. 47 will be the high today, and then Sunday, 50, and then Monday, 51 degrees. I asked my boss, Kelly Michaels, to stay because we're going to talk about disc jockeys and how they affected us and how they changed us. And then we'll go to Elvis and the Colonel. And this guy, Marshall Terrill, has written about Steve McQueen. He's written books about all these guys of the 50s. Now, Kelly Michaels is here, and I say this all the time, publicly and privately. He is the man. He's the program director here for 710 KNUS, but he's an old top 40 jock. And I wrote these questions down for everybody, 303-696-1971, about disc jockeys and what they did to you growing up, and what city and what were the calls and the formats and what changed you and what was the music. So let us begin. When did you get into business?
I got into business in 1983.
Wow.
And I started in a small daytime country station in northern Michigan. And you couldn't hear it outside the city limits.
No, not sure, yeah.
But it was great. And the sister station was a rock station. So I gravitated towards the rock station and became the night jock at the station eventually.
All nights?
No, actually, I started off on the evening 7 to midnight.
That's
shift.
a great gig.
Oh, it's a wonderful gig because no one's in the building. You got it all to yourself.
That's exactly right.
It's wonderful.
All right, so everybody, 303-696-1971, Elvis and the Colonel, this book. And I was telling the fellas, this guy puts a really good spin on the Colonel. Everybody else who has ever written about the Colonel hates the Colonel, including, what was his name that played him? Tom Hanks played him in that Elvis bio. Right. And Tom Hanks came out and said the Colonel was diabolic. Say that word, Peter.
Diabolic.
There it is. Mm-hmm. And he was just a horrible human. And everybody said he was just a horrible human. This guy says not so fast, that maybe without the Colonel, there would have never been a giant Elvis Presley like he was. Now, I am old enough, and I'm sure there's tons of people listening, to remember the impact when Elvis went on Ed Sullivan. But we were listening to Elvis. And the radio station I grew up on the call letters were WAMO, W-A-M-O. It was a black station.
Yeah, in Pittsburgh.
It's legendary.
It is.
And it was all the jocks were black except the afternoon drive guy. And his name was Porky Chadwick, your daddy-o, the radio, the boss hoss, your platter pushing papa, the heater with the geeter. I still knock him up. Yeah, everybody walked around. We all had Porky Chadwick's Social Security cards in our pocket. That's what the Social Security. But,
I love that.
Oh, it was great. And we brought him out here for a Pittsburgh reunion party. And this is the first time I ever really, hey, man, you're the man. And he was something else. He was the boss hoss. But guys that grew up on different cities, there were the guys. We were talking about it before the show started, sitting on the off air with you.
Sure.
Who was your guy that you listened to?
Well, I'm a Midwest kid, so Chicago and WLS. I mean, that was the station, and it was super huge. And then CKLW, Windsor, Detroit. Was another great top 40 station.
Yeah.
And these things weren't just top 40 stations. They straddled the line between top 40 and rock, and their personalities were fantastic.
Yeah.
LS was the Rock of Chicago. And Larry Lujak was the morning host.
He was the man.
He had a great attitude. He was sarcastic and really quick-witted. And he was teamed up with Little Tommy in the morning, and they would do this bit called Animal Stories and read stories about these crazy, dogs and cats and birds and weird things happening with them, and it was hilarious. It was good radio.
Also, we've talked about this privately. you knew the real legend, Bubba the Love Sponge.
Oh, sure. Yeah, Bubba the Love Sponge. We all got he got his start in Indiana. I got my start in Indiana. And Bubs, went on to
do many things.
And he's now in the Tampa market.
How old is he?
Bubs is pushing 60 now.
It's got to be.
Getting close.
47 will be the high today. 303-696-1971 is our number. Kelly Michaels and Peter Boyles. What disc jockey did you grow up on? What's important to talk about is the effect that they had on your life. We came home from school and we turned on Whammo.
Sure.
And listened to the Boss House. But there was a lead in, and I later found out, and this was during what was called the scandals. They were, they had their hands out. There was a
lot of money floating around the business. Record companies were super powerful and loaded with cash, and they would use that to influence the jocks who had these huge audiences at these AM stations across the country.
Our lines are lighting up. We'll go to the calls in one moment. Kelly Michaels and Peter together. But Bob Lee, who was my mentor, who was the rock and rebel from WJBK Detroit, and he legitimately was a terrible, wonderful influence on my life. And but they went through the scandals.
Yeah.
And how it would work, and we'll get to the phones in a second. I'd be the record rep, and we had a name for them that we can't say on the air. And I would walk in the radio station, and I would say, "Hey, Kelly, give me your car keys."
Yeah.
And you throw me the keys, and I'd leave. When your shift was over, your car was outside, maybe 4 new tires.
New carpeting in your house.
Yeah. Open. Iggy's onto it. Iggy sends me a text. Night Smoke, dude. I was Night Smoke's traffic reporter.
Nice.
And you would open up your. Remember when the cars had ashtrays in them, and you'd open up the ashtray, and there'd be a couple hundred in cash.
Yeah, a lot of that going on.
Yeah, and the back seat, maybe a coat for the old lady. And then there would be 2 records on the passenger seat. What
a subtle suggestion that maybe you might want to play this every 30 minutes for the next month.
And Bob always said that's when a guy showed up called, I think they called them the music director, or because guys could pick their own music back then, could they not?
Yeah, in the early days.
Yeah. So when you're walking in to go on the shift, you're bringing in the tunes, and how does the company owners or whomever, how do they know you're not getting spiffed to play those songs?
Well, they had sneaking suspicions.
Yeah, they did, yeah. And part of it, and there's something that's really important here, then we'll go to the phones. There were hit-making cities. Pittsburgh was a hit-making city.
Absolutely.
And the reason it was where there was black and white kids would cross over. New York was not a hit-making city. It was a big city. But Cleveland, that's why the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's in Cleveland.
Detroit, absolutely.
And you can hear him when he sings, he goes, "The heart of rock and roll is still beating."
In Cleveland.
Yep. And then the background singers go, "Detroit."
Right.
And I mean, it was where, and one of the great moments when the guy says, "You can go to Pittsburgh. And if you could go to Pittsburgh and you could get a hit, then you had a hit."
Sure.
And then they would take it to Miami or take it to LA, or they take it to, I don't even believe that Chicago was hit making. It was too big.
No, it was too big. There were a few minor acts that came out of Chicago, but it wasn't a Pittsburgh and it wasn't a Detroit.
And one thing last night I was prepping for the show, and something jumped off the page, and I came in and told you, and it jumped off the page for you as well. Alan Freed, who I think he was in Cleveland, and I think that's one of the reasons why the heart of rock and roll is still beating in Cleveland, is Alan Freed. So Alan Freed takes that Moondoggie show, and they end up in Boston, and I didn't know this till I read it last night. 1958. Imagine the time frame. Alan Freed is in Boston, and he wants to do that Moondog show. And he goes on the air, I'll read you the quote. It looks like the Boston police don't want you to have a good time.
Wow.
Freed was arrested. It sounds like Trump. Freed was arrested, charged with inciting a riot, and was fired from his job at WINS in Cleveland, in Boston. But this was the one that I read that I brought this in. So he graduates from high school. He's a Pennsylvania guy. I didn't know that. 1940, and he starts his own band. And I immediately came into Kelly this morning, and the name of the band was
the Sultans of Swing.
Wow. And the Sultans. They were the Sultans of Swing.
And how does Mark Knopfler get a hold of that?
It's in the bio. Let's see if I can find it again. I got so much junk in front of me.
That is so cool.
It's so cool. Let me turn the pages. But if the people don't know who Alan Freed was, and most people do, but he was the first jock concert promoter. He actually made the phrase rock and roll.
Yeah.
He's it. And you remember, anybody that remembers, there was a group that I still love called Billy Ward and the Dominoes, and Jackie Wilson was in the Dominoes, and I think Clyde McPhatter was in the Dominoes, but they had a song called 60-Minute Man. I don't know if we could play it this morning, but there's a line in that, and it's Billy Ward and the Dominoes, and he goes, I can sing it, but I won't do it. I can rock them, roll them all night long, rock and roll. And it was black speak for sexual intercourse.
Right.
And that's where they picked that up, rock and roll, but it comes from street. But so let me see if I can find that.
And that's rock and roll is one of the reasons why the Hall of Fame's in Cleveland.
That's right.
A lot of people don't know that.
And that's, changed I once had a chance to talk to Dick Clark. Was by phone. He had done a book called Rock, Roll, and Remember, which I think is just a really good book. And he talked about the package shows where they'd 3 or 4 buses, and in sports it's called platooning. They would send the show on ahead of itself. And he said when they went south, and the first time, and he's got Frankie Lyman and the teenagers with him, and he's got young, but the black and white kids are listening to the same music.
Yeah,
and it did what it did. I got to find that line of, they had the Sultans of Swing. Here it is. Freed was born to a Welsh-American mother, Maud Palmer, and a Russian-Jewish immigrant father, Charles S. Freed, in Pennsylvania. In 1933, Freed's family moves to Salem, Ohio, where Freed attended Salem High School, graduating in 1940. While Freed was in high school, he formed a band called the Sultans of Swing.
Wow.
Want to take some calls, boss?
Yeah.
Lines are jammed. Here we go. Marcus on line 1. You're on the radio show. Coming up, Elvis and the Colonel. And there's so much Elvis and Denver stuff. And I wrote down a bunch of questions way off the wall. Marcus, go ahead, brother man. You're on.
Yeah. Back when I was growing up, our disc jockeys, we weren't like Pittsburgh and everything. They last maybe a year or two, and they kept changing.
If they were good, if they were good.
Yeah, but they didn't last too long, Peter. It's not like
no.
Well,
Cowboy Town,
Denver was a feeder market, a very influential feeder market. A lot of great talent came through this town.
Marcus, where did you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in Denver, and here's a few things I always remember during that time period. Midnight with Don Kirshner's rock concert.
Oh yeah.
Come on at 11 and shut down at 12.
Yeah.
And then back then you had Wolfman Jack. You could hear this. And then I think my favorite was Casey Kasem.
Casey Kasem grew up with my mentor, Bob Lee.
Yeah. Wow, that's great.
Casey is Lebanese, or was Lebanese. He's passed away. And they grew up in Detroit.
Casey was a jock at CKLW, Windsor, Detroit.
And they worked in Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just across the river from Detroit.
As did Wolfman Jack. Their studios were in the United States, but the stick was I think it was in Tijuana. Matter of fact, I know it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so anything that begins with an X is Mexican radio. C is Canadian radio.
You know, when WKRPN Cincinnati came out,
yep,
then everybody was talking about like Johnny Fever and everything. So that's why I was kind of smiling when you guys were talking today.
I knew at least 15 Johnny Fevers. At least I mean, not using the last name, but just that personality. I knew
they could go from 0 to 60.
Oh.
I mean, walk in half asleep and then turn that microphone on and boom, they're on it.
That's right. And when it was the ratings periods, they would have what we used to call disc jockey helper.
Yeah.
And disc jockey helper. Brother, thank you very much.
No hamburger helper.
No. We called it disc jockey helper. All right. Hey, Don, you're on a radio show. The man with a plan. Kelly Michaels is here. Peter Boyles. And coming up, Elvis and the Colonel. Don, you're on.
Good morning, Peter. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks, brother.
Hey, when you mentioned Alan Freed, brought me back to a video on YouTube of Richie Valens, Alan Freed, and Chuck Berry. Have you ever seen that?
I have. You
remember the song that Richie sang?
Man, give me a sec. Do it. Just jump to it. What is it?
His name's Ooh My Head.
Then I haven't seen it because I would have remembered that. I know that.
So here's the second part, right. And this might. So that was redone by a group, and they called it Boogie with Stu.
Huh.
Zeppelin.
Name the group. Zeppelin. Right on.
See?
Right on. What a knockoff.
You can't get past Kelly. And
here's who's better than Kelly on this? I mean,
nobody. And here, this is interesting because when Kelly and I were talking, our age differences, and when rock and roll started, and they would play it on sort of lesser formats. Is that fair to say? Like and Whammo was, and then there was the white boy top 40 stations, and the one in Pittsburgh was KQV, and they would
had to have a Q.
Yes, it did. Yes.
All good top 40 stations back then had a Q.
But they would not play certain songs.
Sure, they were overtly
and
discriminating.
And I was extremely lucky to have spent time with Hank Ballard. Hank Ballard was playing Denver, and he did the show. And Hank Ballard and the Midnighters didn't get a lot of ink, but he wrote the twist. Chubby Checker, they stole it from him, but Hank Ballard was the twist, and he wrote, Annie had a baby, she can't work no more, and I'm not making this up, man. There's a thrill on the hill.
Yeah.
Work with Me, Annie was another one of their songs, and so we talked about it. And first of all, he's gone now. What an influence! And I said to him, I said, boy, did my dad hate you.
Did the Stones song, was it Let's Spend the Night Together, get banned from playing in the U.S.?
Probably.
Yeah. But it wasn't Satisfaction. No. I think it was Let's Spend the Night Together.
And I'm a huge Stones fan, but that's right. I think they banned it on Ed Sullivan, and he went ahead and sang it anyhow.
Yeah.
Oh, that was the Doors.
No, I think it was the Stones too.
Come on, baby, light my fire.
Light my fire, but also I think Mick Jagger did it.
He banned that, and Jimmy Morrison went ahead and did it.
Well, and also I think Volunteers of America, Grace Slick, and I think she sang it too. I remember reading this stuff years ago, and she went. You know
the song "Star Star" by the Stones.
Star what?
Star Star. Joan Jett did a remake of it.
Okay.
I met Joan Jett. We did a radio show with Joan Jett. She was terrific. Loved Joan Jett. She was the best.
She didn't pull any punches.
I brought my daughter, she was a young woman then, but she was a huge Joan Jett fan, and she was all about, I'm going to meet Joan Jett. We have a picture.
I still am.
I am too. We had a picture of me.
Her 80s stuff was, the best.
Me, Shannon, and Joan Jett. And Joan Jett was like talking to you, man. It was like, she was great. She was really okay.
And she is in remarkably good shape. I think she's a vegan, and she's still touring and tough, still out there.
She's out there. But Joan and the Blackhearts, that was her backup.
Right.
Yeah, and the Blackhearts. How
about Cherry Bomb?
The Club Cherry Bomb.
No.
The band?
Joan Jett was a member of the band.
Yeah.
Cherry, what was her last name? Skinny little blonde girl and a teddy.
It escapes me right now, but yeah.
Really? Yeah. Well, Kelly, you check out Star, and you try to get that played on the radio.
Donnie, you're the man.
Guys, have a good weekend.
Thanks.
I got to rock. Good talking, Pete.
Now, coming up, this book is entitled Elvis and the Colonel, and an insider's look at the most legendary partnership in show business. And so many of us go back to this moment when Elvis hit. And not playing that down, but was there ever this moment where all of a sudden everything changed when you were jocking or a kid, either way, because of a musical group?
I think, I grew up in the 80s, so MTV was really a huge moment.
Good.
And it broke all kinds of records as far as, music styles and that whole 80s thing.
Yep.
For me, MTV was the big deal. And at the time, all the radio program directors were scared of it.
And should have been.
And it took a while, but video has kind of killed the radio star.
That's a song, right?
Yeah. The Buggles.
Yeah.
First song ever played on MTV.
Get out of here.
Yes. Yeah.
First, what was it called? Letter's first station you worked at?
KLT.
And what was the format?
Country. I mean, if your first radio gig wasn't country, you haven't paid your dues.
Well, mine was an MOR station, but the first hit show that I got on was KLAK with Bob playing country. And we hit it just right because disco was dying. Travolta did
Urban Cowboy.
Bang.
And boom, it was hot. It was on fire back then.
It just rocked.
Yeah.
And so hang on. One line's open, 303-696-1971. The man, Kelly Michaels, is here. Peter Boyles, 47, gusty at times, and 50 and sunny tomorrow, Monday, 51 degrees. And don't forget, and we'll be talking here in a moment with the guys getting ready for the toy run is next Sunday. Have you ever felt conflicted when somebody on the street asks you for money? And I know you want to help, but there is a better way, and it's making a donation to Step Denver. I go back all the way to Bob Cote back in the days, and the doors were before Coors Field, and every day now guys walk through the doors a Step, and they make a commitment to sobriety, work, and accountability, and their lives change. Please, the stories are unbelievable. I've sat in meetings with these guys, and they'll scare you. And here they are, sober, going to jobs. And the Colorado Gives Day is December the 10th. Step Denver is counting on people like you to send and invest in these guys who are investing in themselves. Become contributing members of our community again, because Step makes a real change happen. Every dollar you donate goes to work since they don't take government funding. The late, great Bob Cote knew it all. Step makes a real change every dollar you donate. So don't wait for December the 10th or get on it on December the 10th. Make your tax-deductible donation to coloradogives.org/StepDenver. Again, coloradogives.org/StepDenver.
At this hour, I'm Christina Owayo in Dallas, and here are your top stories.
A record number of Americans are expected to travel this Thanksgiving to celebrate with their loved ones. Correspondent Mitch McCann has the details.
Almost 80 million Americans will be traveling 50 miles or more from home over the Thanksgiving period, according to the American Automobile Association, including a record number by air and road. The Transportation Security Administration says during the Thanksgiving period, it will screen more than 18 million people at U.S. airports. a 6% increase on last year. Airlines have recently been under scrutiny over what a Senate panel calls junk fees imposed by carriers, saying this week it would be calling airline executives to explain the extra charges levelled at customers, including asking passengers to pay for more legroom. In New York, Mitch McCann for Salem News Channel.
U.S. Airlines is preparing for a holiday rush, and so is the Post Office, the UPS, and FedEx. That's because shipping companies will deliver about 2.2 billion packages to homes and businesses across the United States from Thanksgiving through December 31st, according to the president of Ship Matrix. That's down from 2.3 billion packages last year, most likely because the shopping period is 1 week shorter than it was in 2023. Consumers are shopping further ahead of Black Friday, and more purchases are taking place in physical stores.
In Dallas, Christina Owayo, Salem News Channel.
Rocky Mountain.
It's a king, boy. Coming up, Elvis and the Colonel. The look at the most legendary partnership in showbiz. He knocked it out. The king of rock and roll. 710 KNUS. I'm Peter Boyles. Good morning. 47 the high, 50 Sunday, Monday, 51 degrees. This is a friend, and the next Sunday weather looks real good for the 39th Annual Children's Hospital Toy Run. And the one and only Robby Farrow from Mile High, Harley Davidson. Hey, I know you love music. And Robby, what disc jockey in what city did you grow up on? And the call letters and the effect. This is not why you're on, but I thought I'd throw it at you. Who was the jock that you grew up on?
Wolfman Jack.
I met the wolf.
Did you?
Yeah. You grew up on the wolf. There were no.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. So that's the first disc jockey that stands out in my mind when I hear the phrase and his voice. And I can't even tell you what the radio station was that my father listened to. But my parents were pretty progressive with music as well. So that would be my first memories.
I met him. His name was Bob Smith, by the way. That was Wolfman Jack's real
name.
No
way.
Way. He was, and my mentor and the wolf were friends. And they had brought him to Denver to open a place that was a disco, and it was all It was on Hamden and I-25, and it was inside of a hotel, and it was called the Wharf. And
oh wow!
And so we all have mentors, and I had this great mentor named Bob Lee, and he said, "Hey, do you want to go meet Wolfman Jack?" And I'm looking at him like, "Of course I do." And and Bob knew him, and so we got the El Paso, and the Wolf was not. He and Bob knew about Mexican radio, and so I just sat there and listened to them talk about the Mexican radio stations, because they had the studios were in the U.S., but they would broadcast out of Mexico, and that's where that's why. Where did you live in California?
I did not live in California.
See, where were you? Where were you as a kid?
I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York.
Where did you hear the Wolf?
I don't know. That's why I say I don't even know what station it was. Wow. But my father used to listen to a station that he would come through on.
Oh, guys, because they had 150,000 watts or whatever they did. It was like Radio Free Europe, and they could just shoot that up the West Coast all the way to Alaska. And
wow,
the Wolf was there. And good. And again, disc jockeys can change you. And like when I was a kid, like, ooh, that was cool. So
yeah,
it would. All right, let me do this. Children's Hospitals, Colorado Toy Run, and of course, Robby is with Mile High Harley Davidson and Parker. All right, pick it up, Robby. What are we going to do, and where are we going to go?
So we're going to start off by getting a new unwrapped toy and bringing that with us. And there's a myth that stuffed animals are not allowed. However, stuffed animals are allowed as long as they are new and unwrapped. The Children's Hospital volunteers, they sort the toys because some of the children can have stuffed animals, some of the children cannot have stuffed animals. So if you like to bring stuffed animals as a gift, that's okay too. So we start with the gifts. Then what we do is we show up at the Aurora Sports Park at 19300 East Colfax. Gates open up at 8 a.m. on Sunday morning, December 8th, and we hang out. We drink hot chocolate and coffee, maybe have a breakfast burrito. 10 a.m. sharp, first wave leaves, and waves continue until everybody gets to the hospital. This year, for the first time in 3 years, they've got a special parking lot for the bikers to stop this time. Over the last 3 years, it's been a ride through, drop off your toy and go. This year, we get to stop in a parking lot. We get to walk our gifts up to the front entrance of the Children's Hospital so we can wave to all the kids. So that's something we haven't had for a minute. So that's going to be really great. And then once we get through there, we head over to Mile High Harley Davidson of Aurora for the after party, and we have good fellowship.
It's the best. And this guy's wonderful. And it is going to be a show. We're going to be a tell. We're going to rock and we're going to roll. And then again, Rob will be back with us this next Saturday because December 8th is the 39th annual. So it does, as I said to somebody the other day, I said, it does your black heart so much good to go and do something nice for somebody. So
I'm telling you, and Peter, I love what you say all the time is when you pull up and you see those kids, your problems become so small.
And back
small.
And my grandson's now, he's 12, believe it or not. And when you come out of that hospital, and it used to be when we went up on the floors. Now we'll see the kids in chairs and wires sticking in and out, and their parents are surrounding them and keeping them warm. You walk away, go, okay. And what was that?
There's nothing I can't handle in my day now.
I'll take it right on the chin. I may say this afternoon, if not, I'll see you in the middle of next week. Robby, thank you. This is a good man, everybody. Robby Farrow, thank you. And I'll see you in the middle of the week.
Thank you so much, Peter.
You the man.
We'll talk to you.
Got it. All right. 303-696-1971 coming up. And this is really an insider book. It's entitled Elvis and the Colonel. And the fellow who did this book did biographies of Elvis and Johnny Cash and Steve McQueen and Billy Graham. So we got a lot to talk about. He's going to spend time with us. So let us go here. We go to Jack. Jack, you're on a radio show Saturday morning. Good morning.
Yeah, Pete, you're fabulous. Your memory is unsurpassed, and you and I are contemporaries. But I think you goofed up when you said 1010 WINS was out of Massachusetts. That was a Manhattan state.
I didn't say it. The caller said it.
Okay. Anyway, but getting to the point of what you're talking about the center of all of where the white and the black artists came together was Memphis. And the guy that was in the middle of that, who ripped off virtually everybody, was Don Robby. And of course, he started with Duke, and then he went to Peacock Records. But every artist that wanted to get any kind of anything, you were talking like the payola that was Alan Freed and all. It worked both ways. They blocked artists out of they had enough power to block them out of certain markets. They wouldn't even play their songs in certain areas. In other words, he was a go-to. He was an absolute gangster, Robby was. But one of the most important things that he ever said was, when he was talking about in Memphis, he says, you've got Johnny Ace, who was a black man who sang like a white person. And you had Elvis Presley, who was a white person who sang like a black person. That was the crossover.
Well, that's what they looked for in Elvis, is that he could make that leap. And we'll talk. That's right. We'll talk about that with Marshall Terrill, but he was the guy. And and they picked him up at Sun Records. There's a fabulous picture of it's Johnny Cash, it's Jerry Lee Lewis, and it's Elvis. And they're all on the Sun label. And wow.
Elvis's big hit was Hound Dog, and he got
Big
that
Mama
from
Thornton.
Big Mama Thornton.
Yeah,
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And that's all through Don Robby. But Don Robby was the biggest crook in the business. He ripped off everybody, and it didn't matter what they were doing, he got a piece of it.
And a lot of it, and now we know more about it. There's books being written about it. It was the mob.
Oh, sure.
And
absolutely.
And the mob was behind it. Have you ever seen it? It's a sleeper film, but I think it's great. It's entitled Cadillac Records. Have you ever seen that film?
No, but I've heard of Cadillac Records.
And it's on the Chess label, but there were Chess brothers. And the way the film portrays it, there's just Leonard Chess, but there was two brothers, Chess brothers. And they, they were who they are on this side and who they were on that side. But there's only two movies that I think represented that time period. And this Cadillac Records is one of them. And the other one is entitled Telling Lies in America. And it's just a sleeper. It's about Cleveland. And it is a wonderful, wonderful, it's very dark, but very wonderful about top 40 radio back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And go on, I'm sorry.
I can remember you mentioned it also. Annie Had a Baby, Can't Work No More, No More, No More.
No more.
And I can remember when that was being played on the radio. And when I was, you and I were probably 12, 13 years old when 52 we're talking about. So we were 12.
No, Hank Ballard. No, because I'm a Hank Ballard geek only because I got to actually sit with Hank Ballard and talk. They wouldn't play a lot of Hank Ballard, and the black stations would play Hank, but the twist, Hank Ballard wrote the twist. And if you think of the names, Chubby Checker, Fats, listen, Fats Domino, Fats Chubby. Yeah. And you know what it was? It was Dick Clark's wife. And they found this guy and they knocked off Hank. Hank got his money out of it because they couldn't rob him all the way. They robbed him, but they couldn't, they couldn't rob him totally. And the Midnighters, I'm telling you, that was records. Annie Had a Baby and House of Blue Lights, and he had another song I can't say the name on the air, and he was something. And he was a little bitty guy. He was like Frankie Lyman. He was like so many.
Frankie Lyman was one of the first. Yeah, they all got exploited though.
They destroyed.
At that time in New York, I didn't listen to a whole lot of the rock and roll. I don't know if any of your listeners remember this, but it came on around midnight. I used to listen to a DJ called himself Symphony Sid, and he played
Bob Lee knew
all of the
Bob Lee knew Symphony Sid.
Well, he used to play all the jazz, and I was
Yes,
a
he
big
did.
Cannonball Adderley and all
Yes, he did.
I love the jazz, and I like that a lot better than the rock and roll.
Well,
But of course,
there was some. Bob knew. I mean, Symphony Sid, and there's a Symphony Sid song we can't sing on the air either, but it was like Charlie Parker came up with it because he played Cannonball, he played Charlie, he played
Julian.
He played
on the sax.
Played everybody. Played everybody.
Yeah.
And he was a jock. And then there was a guy. There's a place called Small's Paradise. And
that's in New York.
Absolutely.
I knew his son.
Tommy Smalls.
I knew his son. The guy who owned that nightclub. I'm trying to think what his first name was now. I knew his son.
Bob was so gifted. And this is a guy we lost way too early. And it's just one of those. But he picked up, because being in the Navy, he picked up being able to speak Spanish. He spoke Puerto Rican. I mean, just like he was born in San Juan. So he goes to New York and he gets a gig working on a Puerto Rican radio station in New York City. And he called himself Roberto or whatever he tagged for his last name. But he knew Symphony Sid, and he knew Small's Paradise. I mean, he would sit and then he goes to Detroit and becomes the rock and rebel, Robert E. Lee, and somebody gives him a phone call. It was Berry Gordy, and he goes to Hitsville, and he meets everybody in Hitsville. I mean, he was my mentor, and he taught me the good stuff. But boy, he showed me the other stuff too. He was classic.
I used to go to the Apollo Theater on 125th Street, me and one of my other friends, and we would be the only two white faces in the whole building.
They reopened. It was called it was dubbed some of you will know tons more than I will. I've read about it. It was called the Chitlin Circuit, and one of the places that the Chitlin Circuit was at a place called Howard, and it was in Washington D.C. And they reopened that, and I went to the opening, and they had like Sonny Till and the Orioles. They had, they had what was his name, Fuqua, and Harvey Fuqua and the Moonglows. I mean, they just kept bringing these wonderful acts out, and it was that was the music. I mean, that was the brew.
I just remembered something you mentioned, the nightclub Small's Paradise in New York. His son, his first name was Caswell. I just remembered it. You know, we're going back to 1955.
Oh, sure.
Now, 56.
Of course.
Caswell, his name was.
That's when all of this began to become impactful on my life. And like I said, I can still do the Porky Chadwick rap. And when Kel was here, everybody had a Porky Chadwick, if you were anybody. They had a Porky Chadwick Soul Security card. You kept it in your wallet. It was from the Boss Man. And I'm Bobby Brusco, the late Bobby Brusco, and we brought him out here for the Pittsburgh reunion party that we did in Central City. And I got a picture of myself and the Boss Hoss, and he's gone now, but he was still gigging, and he played the songs again, the music. And I just mentioned the Moonglows and, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. It was just, I can't describe it because it was it. That was it.
In those years, they had the best music that this country ever produced, particularly the Motown, which came a little later.
Well, remember, I mean, Berry Gordy's not doing inner city music. He's not doing doo-wop. He's doing what he knew. And this was I think his true gift. He knew what would work, when he had Smokey Robinson and, and all those gifted people. But Diana Ross and the Supremes, they could play a white club in Vegas, that kind of thing. And that wasn't the Shirelles, that wasn't, we're getting away. I got to take a break. Thank you. All right, man. 303-696-1971. Coming up. Elvis and the Colonel, and this guy, he's done some tremendous bios, but it's subtitled "An Insider's Look at the Most Legendary Partnership in Show Business." What disc jockey did you grow up on? What city? What call letters? And what changed you about all of it? 303-696-1971. I'm Peter Boyles. Happy today to talk about our friends at Water Pros. Water Pros cares about the quality of your water, and you can remove forever chemicals and microplastics and hard water. And Water Pros are there. The special for me, naming a special, Peter Boyles, for $3,195. Now, I know the money's the money, but you get a water softener, you get a point of use reverse osmosis drinking water system fully installed. First step, and I trust these guys. You will as well. Let them come and test your water. Let them come to your home and test your water, answer all of your questions and concerns. It's just smart. Go to waterpros.net today and request your free water test. 303-862-5554. 303-862-5554. Set up the appointment. 303-862-5554. Let them come first and test your water. You will be more than glad to do this. 303-862-5554. And you can ask them for the special named after me. There you go. There you go. The king, baby. My soul, what's wrong with me? Elvis and the Colonel coming up in about 4 minutes on 710 KNUS 47 the high. Let's go to Rich. And we got about 4 minutes, and then we got to flip over on the other side. Richard, good morning, man. Thank you.
Hi, Pete. I've met you a couple of times. I grew up in Pittsburgh.
I know you. Yes.
I grew up in Coraopolis. And you're up the Allegheny, and I grew up down the Ohio.
Yes.
Well, we both probably listened to Porky.
For real.
Pork the Torque.
The boss man, the heater with the geeter. Your blonde thunder with your record wonder.
Your daddy of the radio. Your
platypus and Papa. Yes.
Platypus and Papa.
Yes. I got him. He and I got a tape somewhere, I think, and he and I'm doing him. We lost our caller right in the middle of that. That thing blew up. That's not right. Coming up, Elvis and the guy was on to it. Real quick, David Ellis, Cherry Creek. You've heard me talk about taking your valuables to David. Now gift giving time is here. This is the final day of November. Get ready. David Ellis, and again, we lost my caller. All the valuables you have tucked away in your home, it's still true. Share these reasons to see David, just in case you don't have a Rolex, rare coins, or a silver tea set. See David Ellis for all the most meaningful gift-giving occasions. David Ellis Jewelers. Just the right items, just the right prices for special people that mean the most to you. Gift-giving time. It's an antique watch, an emerald pendant, a gold necklace, a diamond ring, the most trusted jeweler. He is my friend. I saw him this week. Colorado for decades, dazzling cases filled with hundreds of new and used pieces for loved ones, and they will treasure them. David's on right now. He's there on the corner of 3rd and Clayton and Cherry Creek, and he's got a black awning on the building. Easy to find. It says, David Ellis, 3rd and Clayton and Cherry Creek, 6 days a week. You can call him and talk to him at 303-322-8779, 303-322-8779, and tell him I sent you. We have any time left to get these guys. No. On the other side, Marshall Terrill will be our guest, Elvis and the Colonel, and it's going to be a really good hour of talk radio, not because of me, because of him. Stay here. This is 710 KNUS. The voices of Bret the Hitman Hart and the King, Ric Flair. 710 KNUS, we are Denver's talk station on a Saturday morning, November 30th, final day of November 2024. And the weather goes, well, 47 windy outside, 50 Sunday, and on Monday, 51 degrees. A week from tomorrow is, of course, the 39th annual Children's Hospital Colorado Toy Run. I've been waiting to do this for quite a while. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome. And if you go to our, we got a big echo on that, brother. But if you go to a couple of different places, you can see the two of us together. And Marshall, you pronounce your last name Terrill. Am I doing that correctly? We lost him. Yeah, we got an echo in it. As soon as I picked it up, I picked up the echo. He's writing about Elvis Presley, and he's writing about Colonel Tom Parker. We'll get this straightened out. It'll just take a second to do it. But this is the first book that I've ever read that really puts Tom Parker, the Colonel, into a positive light. You know, maybe if we dropped the stream, Adam, maybe if we dropped the stream, we'll just be he and I straight like a call together. And they're talking. But remember, when Elvis came here, and he apparently played Denver in the 50s, but of course the big time was in 76. And that's when the cars were given away, and that's all the stories that I've heard. So why don't we, well, I'll tell you what, we'll do this to move some stuff around and wait and see if we can just drop the stream. We were going to try and split screen us together. So if you ever feel conflicted when somebody on the street asks you for money, and I know you want to help, as people always do, but there is a better way. It's making a donation to Step Denver, which you can do right now for Colorado Gives Day. And the Colorado Gives Day, I think they're going to bring the guys from Step here into the studio with Jeff and Billy. But the web is coloradogives.org/StepDenver. Every day, men walk through the doors of Step on Larimer Street, right in front of the Coors Field, and they make this commitment to sobriety. I go back when actually Mike Rosen introduced me to the late, great Bob Cote to make that commitment to sobriety and work and accountability and to recover from the addictions and rebuild their lives. And the stories are unbelievable. I've sat in rooms with these guys, and they'll scare you, and they tell the stories. Colorado Gives Day is December the 10th. Step Denver is counting on people like you to invest in men who are investing in themselves, to becoming contributing members of our society, our community. And because Step makes real changes happen, every dollar you donate will be turned into $5 of impact. And since they don't take government funding, Bob started that, your support means much, much more. Don't wait for December the 10th. Make your tax-deductible donation today. coloradogives.org/StepDenver. Again, this is an easy one. coloradogives.org/StepDenver. Want me to give it a try here and see what happens? You try it. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been looking forward to this. Please say welcome to City Marshall Terrill. Hey, Marshall, let's you and I try now. How are you? And happy Saturday. Do we bang? What we got to do, Adam? Do we got him there, Marshall? Do we got you?
Yes.
There it is. I don't want to have an echo with us because this is an important show to me. And I know you're split screening with us. So let us begin. I read your bio, and you have met and done work on some pretty amazing characters yourself. So first of all, wow, what a great life. And thanks for doing our show. Can I take it to some of these other guys just for a second?
Sure.
Yeah. Steve McQueen. I mean, talk about Steve McQueen just for a second.
Well, he's known as cinema's king of cool.
Absolutely.
And was the #1 box office star from 1963 to 75.
Yeah.
And you can see him on my background here.
I do. I see him back there. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the story with this is that he was in Alaska, and he was hanging out with some buddies, and he just decided that he would get drunk and drive and do little wheelies in the downtown area, and then he got pulled over by the cops, and then he He said, "Hi, I'm Steve McQueen, and I'm having fun in your two-bit town." And the Alaskan trooper said, "I'm an Alaskan trooper, and you are going to jail."
One of my friends, and his name is Jeff Decker, and Jeff's a sculptor. And there's two guys that are really in-house Harley guys. One guy's name is David Yule, and David and we share something together, and Jeff Decker. And Decker's dad was a desert racer in a wrench. And I met Allie McGraw, which is like one of the highlights of my life too. And when they had the hangar, when they all lived in that hangar together. And if I always make a joke when Decker tells stories, I said, Jeffrey, if half of those stories, and which they are true, that hangar must have been something. Talk about when they owned the hangar, when McQueen owned the hangar.
Well, that was at the end of his life. And I'm getting some echo on my end too.
Yeah,
sorry.
I know. I'm sorry.
So he was living in Malibu with Allie McGraw, and then he met his last wife, Barbara. And then I think that he just wanted a completely separate identity from the last marriage. So then they moved to Santa Paula together. And that's where they lived in the hangar. Now, they lived in the hangar for about 6 months before their house was even built.
Wow.
And in the beginning, I asked Barbie, who's his last wife, I said, how could you do that? Because to me, it was essentially like living in a garage. And she said it was the coolest thing that I had ever experienced.
Yeah.
Well, in 2010, Santa Paula held a celebration for Steve McQueen. And one of the people owned a airplane hangar. And he allowed us to stay there. And she slept underneath the plane, the wing of a plane. And of course, I stayed in the bedroom upstairs. But I was like, okay, I finally get it. I totally understand. And that's one of those things where you have to experience it to understand it.
Decker told me stories of going there with his dad, and he didn't. And Jeffrey is one of the most talented people I think I've ever known in my life, as is David Yule. But he's a little guy and he's tagging along with his dad. Well, everybody and his mom would spend time in that hangar. And he met Von Dutch. He's got these Von Dutch stories that are, and Big Daddy Ed Roth hung out there. And yep. if half of those stories, and I met Allie McGraw, and we spent the whole time talking about Steve McQueen, and Steve stole her away, right, from another guy.
Yeah, he stole her away from Robert Evans, which was a big scandal back in the day.
Wow. Why was McQueen? I've read his life. Why? And I want to get your book and read it. Why was Steve McQueen so cool, or why did we think he was so cool?
Well, like any other icon, he did his own thing. Yeah. It was like, okay, this is my trip, and if you want to follow me, that's fine, but I'm going to go do my thing. And the same could be said for Johnny Cash, who I did a book about.
I know.
Steve Maravich, the basketball player. Yeah. They all had their own thing, you know. They all had their own style. They all had their own signature. And the thing is you don't see people like that around anymore.
Or if they do, they get ground down pretty quickly. Seriously.
They do indeed.
If you please watch this, you can see it together. Go to the website. Marshall Terrill is here. This book is special about Elvis. I'm going to come to some other stuff, but I'm going to come back to Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash was, again, one of those characters you're talking about, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. You can't really define his category of music. He was just kind of in his own thing, and that's what he did his entire career. So, I mean, again, Rolling Stones, they sound like the Rolling Stones. They don't sound like anybody else. That's why they're icons. Within 3 seconds, you can tell it's a Stones song.
You bet.
Same with Johnny Cash.
I was a country disc jockey for a while, and George Jones was always my guy. I was a huge George Jones fan. And somebody had a poem that said, from Bob Dylan till the Rolling Stones, everybody wants to be George Jones. which I thought that was so great, because those are people that I think we're talking about disc jockeys this morning before you joined us, and how much of an impact those men and women had on our lives when we were kids.
Right. Yeah, and these are exclusive 20th century figures who did their own thing. They didn't worry about political correctness.
No.
And I think that's part of it. I mean, people secretly wish that they could do the things that these guys did way back in the day.
Yeah, I have to think about that, because that really is. I think we were talking about music and the impact that Elvis had. And if I can, throughout the next couple hours with you, to jump back between McQueen and Cash and Elvis, and I know you wrote about Billy Graham, but
yep.
I don't know how old you are. It's none of my business. I'm 81, so
I'm 20 years younger than you.
There you go. Well, when Elvis hit, and my mentor, he was older than I am, but he was a top 40 jock, and there was something, and I grew up on a listening to a black station in Pittsburgh. But Elvis, and this is one of those things they talked about at Sun Records, so I'm going to bring you back to that if I could, that Elvis could make the jump across between black and white, could he not?
Absolutely. He was the change agent, I think.
I think so too.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was also the first post-World War II pop icon. So you had those things going. And then in addition to all that, he could sing, and he was a good-looking guy. So, I mean, of course he would be an idol.
And and without Tom Parker, and I got to tell you something, I've been kind of billboarding it. Everybody that I've ever listened to or spent time with or read their work, this is the first, I'm positive maybe not be the right word, but this is another way, your book is another way of talking about the Colonel that I've never seen or read or listened to before. And I think that makes it, Marshall, that really makes this a significant book. A lead question I wrote down for myself last night: would Elvis have become Elvis without Tom Parker?
Absolutely not. And I can tell you the reasons why. It's the same reason why the Beatles would not have become the Beatles without Brian Epstein. Yeah. You needed that guy in the background to not only push, but have the infrastructure in place. So I recently read a book on the Beatles, and they went. Brian Epstein paid their salaries out of his own pocket for a few years. Now, had he not done that, they probably would have had to go get a job. In the case of Elvis, Colonel Tom Parker, however, he had the infrastructure in place. So Elvis was a regional star, but he was not a national star. And Colonel Parker had the connection to RCA Records. Yep. He had the connections to Hollywood. He had the connections to New York. So when Elvis made that big explosion, his previous manager was a guy named Bob Neal, and Bob Neal recognized he couldn't do the things that Colonel Parker could, and he gladly signed him over. And so he didn't want to step in Elvis's way, and Elvis never forgot that. But Colonel Parker had that infrastructure already in place, and so he recognized Elvis's talents, and so he was able to take him there. So in my mind, there's absolutely no way. I see that argument on Facebook and community posts everywhere. Well, Elvis would have become a star anyway. I was like, well, I don't know if that's true. I mean, we can take a look at Taylor Swift too. There's got to be a machinery behind her to put her in that place. And you, as a former disc jockey, you know that you got to have the label behind you. You got to have a manager behind you. Everything has to click.
That's important that you said that, because that's exactly. And when you ask somebody, would that guy have become that guy without this other guy? And I wanted to lead that question in because so many people have said so many bad things about Tom Parker. In my lucky time doing this for as many years as I've been able to, when that book Elvis: What Happened dropped, and those guys came around, I got to meet Sonny, and I got to meet Lamar. And then here in Denver, of course, the Elvis connections here are just absolutely incredible. If I can take and do a sidebar story, Captain, or he was division chief when he passed, Jerry Kennedy and Petrofesso, the Petrofesso brothers, and Bob Cantwell. I mean, I knew those guys. I got, Jerry Kennedy, man. And so quick sidebar story, Jerry Kennedy passed away. And I literally adored Jerry Kennedy. I thought he was, the ultimate Irish cop. And so we go to the church for a mass for Captain Kennedy, or Division Chief Kennedy. And there's another legendary Denver cop retired division chief, Mike O'Neill. They're Irishmen out of Central Casting. So we're sitting in this church, and I won't name the church. And Mike says to me, he said, "You notice there's a pew missing down here on the right side of the church." It was one of those bowl, up high or all the way down to the altar. And I looked and I said, "Yeah, it's gone." Well, Jerry Kennedy's brother passed away, and Elvis came to Denver. It was very private, and he sang at the service. I don't know if anybody's ever said that story or told that story, but he sang at the service for Jerry's brother. Mm. And I said, "Wow." And he said, that was the pew, the missing pew. That was the pew that Elvis sat in. And I said, "Mike, where's the pew?" He said, "It's at Jerry Kennedy's house." And those guys, they were really tight. They were really tight. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and they were, I did a book with Sonny West, and
what do you think? Yeah.
Sonny talked about those gentlemen, and he said that they were one of the few people that confronted Elvis about his drug issues. Bobby. And now there's this movement afoot. I don't know if you've noticed or not, but there's this movement afoot to say, well, Elvis had all these ailments, and this is why he had to take, these drugs. And but those guys pretty much put it to him like, you're embarrassing us. You are, we're your friends, and you're embarrassing us, and you need help. Yep. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that was probably the last time that he heard from them.
I tell you, it was Ronnie, the Petrofesso brothers, Ronnie and Bobby, and I talked to them all the time. And I was scheduled to have a lunch, and I couldn't do it with everybody, but because I had a private conversation with Ron about it, and they had found, and I can tell you I won't tell you the hotel, but the hotel that he was staying in, and these guys are narcs. I mean, it wasn't that's who they were. They were narcs, and they found whatever the drug that it was. And I think if I say it, I'd be wrong, but I thought that they had found Dilaudid. And
yes, that's right.
And so they confronted him. And they went to his funeral. They were invited to his funeral, but they never saw him again after confronting him in the hotel. So, I mean, they told me that story more than once.
Yeah, and that was a pattern. I mean, Sonny and Red confronted him a couple of times, and he basically said, boys, I'm doing what I'm doing, and if you don't like it, there's the door.
Yeah.
And they, to me, firing those guys was kind of like the last line of not sanity, but just letting the past go.
Our guest this is a special book. Marshall Terrill is our guest, and the book is entitled Elvis and the Colonel, an insider's look at the most legendary partnership in show business. And I certainly the title itself. And you began the part of the hour and talked about without Tom Parker, would Elvis have ever gained this incredible part of his life? And your answer is no, it would have not, or perhaps no, it would have not happened. And I've read other things that the so-called Memphis Mafia guys, and they end up writing a book at the end of Elvis's life entitled Elvis, What Happened? What do you do with that moment, and why they did that book?
Well, as Sonny told it to me, it was twofold. They were fired and were given a week's severance.
Who fired them? I was going to ask Marshall. Who verbally?
It was Vernon.
Yeah.
It was Vernon that called and fired them, but he did it on Elvis's behalf.
Mm.
And so they were given, I think, a week's severance pay. And so financially they were hurting. So, it was twofold. They did it for money, but they also did it as a warning to Elvis, like, your life is headed in this direction, and we want to let the world know. And in this book, we had letters, but we couldn't print them. But there were basically letters from Colonel Parker to Elvis, basically stating, you can prove the world wrong. Just give great shows. Don't worry about what was written about you. Just give these incredible shows, and all that stuff will go to the wayside. Which goes to prove that Colonel Parker really did care about Elvis Presley.
What about I'm sorry, the moment where he says, just get him on stage, and it's part of that film where Tom Hanks plays Tom Parker. And he says, just get him there. Do you believe that happened?
I know who told that story, and I'm actually friendly with the person, but I also know some other people who were there, and they said that didn't happen. So I'm not saying it did or didn't happen. I personally don't believe it happened, but you have to understand the time and the context in which that might have occurred, and that was, this is getting old hat. Colonel Parker in these letters to Elvis was saying, we're touring second tier cities now because you're becoming very, very unreliable, and these tours were actually shorter and shorter, and but Elvis needed to tour because he needed the money. And that's the theme throughout this book.
Yeah,
is that he really did need the money. He made over $100 million in his lifetime, but he ended up with $1 million in his bank account at the end of it. So a lot of his decisions were not artistically driven; they were financially driven.
There are stories, and I've heard people say or had written that Elvis was broke. Does that ring true?
Well, again, he made $100 million in his lifetime. He had $1 million in his checking account. I don't think he had anything in his savings, and he had about $5 million worth of assets, but he was certainly headed in that direction. I mean, at the end of his life, I think he had 3 or 4 jets.
Oh yeah.
112 people on a show. And they were still earning good money, but entertainers seem to think that it's going to last the rest of their lives, and of course it doesn't. And with Elvis, it lasted throughout his lifetime. But had he continued, who knows where that would have ended up? He might have had a dry spell. You don't know. I mean, Jerry Lee Lewis and Chuck Berry and all those guys certainly had a dry spell.
Man, I'm a huge fight fan, and when I've read that stuff, I thought of Elvis in terms of prize fighters, great prize fighters who their purses were, and then when they pass away, somebody has to pays for their funerals. I mean, it's a great sadness, but or they kept getting back in the ring or whatever it was that was really self-destructive. And actors, it's often true with actors. And why? I mean, how about this? Because I'm close to a pause, and talk about how they meet. And I've always, I'm one of these people that believes that your childhood sets the course for so much. What a childhood Elvis had, and he turns into Elvis Presley. And we were talking about disc jockeys, but man, he knocked the house down. And when we first saw him on Sullivan, wow.
That's true. It was like a comet, coming out of the sky. He was just like the Beatles and just like Jimi Hendrix.
Very much.
You've never seen anything like him before.
And there was prize fighters. When the lights first go on to see Mike Tyson, when the lights first go on to see actors, James Dean, just boom. And it's not going to be the same after that. Please, this is a wonderful guest. Marshall Terrill is with us. Elvis and the Colonel, an insider's look at the most legendary partnership in show business. His publisher, St. Martin's. You put him on hold if you would, Adam. I'll tell everybody about Danny Kaplis and the Kaplis Law Firm. And I talk about so much of when Kaplis came in and helped my family, and he was just amazing. And we had been friends, of course, through radio and everything. But as a lawyer, he was something and is something. Dan Kaplis is, of course, his dad's a cop, and we've talked about his mom and his life. But he is believed to be the only lawyer in Colorado history to win 5 straight multi-million-dollar verdicts in Colorado crash cases. He's also believed to have won the largest truck crash verdict in Colorado history. The official law firm now of the Nuggets and the Avalanche. Dan Kaplis is a serious firm. Danny's a serious firm for serious cases and accepts righteous injury on percentage fee basis. So he can represent good people from all walks of life without regard and ability to pay. If you need Danny's help, 303-770-5551 or hit Kaplis, C-A-P-L-A-S law.com. That's dankaplis.law.com. 303-770-5551. 303-770-5551.
At this hour, I'm Christina Owayo in Dallas, and here are your top stories.
Butterball is making life a little easier this Thanksgiving Day by unveiling a new cook-from-frozen turkey that you don't even have to thaw out. The country's largest turkey producer says cooking the turkey will now only take 2 simple steps: unwrapping it and popping it in the oven. It doesn't need basting, brining, or even seasoning. The turkey is specially formulated with a brine that keeps the bird moist during the roughly 5-hour-long cooking process. But a warning, don't stuff the turkey because they say it will pose a food safety risk. If you don't have your turkey yet, you may still be able to get one today at places including Walmart and Kroger. Food safety experts say safely serving a holiday feast takes planning and know-how. Outbreaks of some types of food poisoning tend to rise in November and December. Tainted turkey, undercooked stuffing, and germ-laced gravy from holiday buffets have all led to past illnesses and even deaths. Prepare the turkey properly, experts say. Roast it thoroughly and check for doneness with a food thermometer. Keep side dishes and leftovers out of the critical danger zone of temperatures that allow bacteria to grow. Be careful to clean and sanitize all kitchen surfaces and tools, and keep raw poultry from mingling with uncooked foods.
That's what you need to know at this hour. In Dallas, Christina Owayo, Salem News Channel.
A king. Listen. Let's go up high one more time. With the drums. (710) KNUS. We are Denver's talk station on a Saturday. I'm Peter Boyles, on the air everywhere. 47 will be the high, 50 on Sunday, and on Monday, 51 degrees. And I got this book, I don't know, about 2 months ago, and the book knocked me out. It's entitled Elvis and the Colonel, with us, and we're doing a split screen this morning. Marshall Terrill is with us. And before the morning show started this morning, and Adam, who you've been talking to, Adam Walker, I said, find me a bunch of Elvis music that we can bump in with. He's hit everyone right on the money. He's a young kid. And Burnin' Love. I mean, is there a difference in Elvis in his music prior to going into the Army and after the Army? It's another one of those questions, and people often blame that on Tom Parker. If you would, please.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the music from, let's say, 54, when he was a regional star, and then of course he becomes a big star in 56. Those were the Sun Records years. Those were raw. That was raw music. That was raw rock and roll. That's a lot of people refer to that as the Elvis golden era.
Mm-hmm.
But when he got back from the Army, he was a little bit more polished. But that's okay. I mean, let's look at the trajectory of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. They didn't stay the same. Stones were pretty much an R&B group, and then they switched to rock. And they had about 4 or 5 different careers. Same with the Beatles. I mean, they were the Mop Tops, and then drugs get into the picture, and then there's psychedelia, and then they go back to the basics with the White Album, and then it's slick rock with Abbey Road. So no artist ever stays the same, and so the same was with Elvis.
I hadn't thought of that. And when Elvis does King Creole, there was a novel called Stones for Danny Fisher or something, he really, really, really is a good actor. And then suddenly he starts doing these movies that were almost the same story again and again and again. But when you see Elvis in Jailhouse Rock or King Creole, he's almost a James Dean guy, isn't he? Or do I see that differently?
No, you're absolutely right. It's that magical period of when a young person's in their 20s and they just do whatever they feel, and it just seems like it just clicks on all cylinders. And then as they get older, it's a newer generation, and he has to reinvent himself, and he does. And but those movies were really made because Elvis had to pay the bills. He touring, really, there wasn't big money in touring back then. The bigger money was in movies, and so Elvis had a certain lifestyle that he grew accustomed to, and the movies paid those bills. So that's why he kept doing this. A lot of people blame Colonel Parker for locking him into those movie years, but again, finances sort of dictated everything. And the other thing that you'll find out in the book is when the Beatles came along, Colonel Parker said, "Well, Elvis," because Elvis did want to tour again. Said, "Well, Elvis, if you do tour, you're gonna have to go up against them Beatle boys.
Yeah. And
if you don't sell out, then you're no longer the king of rock and roll." So Colonel Parker waited for that right moment, which was Las Vegas. And that was really kind of the start of Elvis's third or fourth career.
Was there really a relationship between Little Richard and Elvis, or is that just made up?
I don't think. You're talking about? You're referring to the movie?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it was Little Richard. It was it was the R&B artist. No. I mean, they knew each other, but no. If we can address the movie real quick, this book was written as a response to that.
I figured.
We Greg McDonald, who is my co-author. And by the way, Greg was diagnosed with colon cancer 2 months before this book came out, and he passed 3 months after the book came out. He wanted to write this book as a response to the movie because I personally felt like the movie was 50-50 in terms of facts and fiction. And then as I've talked to a lot of Elvis experts, and trust me, there are a lot of bigger Elvis experts than me. They said it was like 80-20. And of course, Colonel Parker was a guy that in this movie was lurking in the shadows and had Elvis tied to a Las Vegas contract, for the rest of his life. And I have to explain to people, well, he had 2 residencies every year in Las Vegas. And it was 4 to 6 weeks, but he wasn't playing Vegas forever. He was touring in between, and he was doing whatever he wanted in between. And the Vegas residencies were just a source of annual income.
I'm an Elvis reader, and Elvis, because when it comes to the Denver stories and everything, and how important he was when he first hit. And there's a moment in that film where there's this confrontation. Did that ever happen?
Which confrontation are you referring to?
Towards the end of the film, when the Presley character confronts Tom Hanks as Tom Parker, and it calls him all kinds of names, and that these, in essence, lived off of him, and et cetera, et cetera. And it was allegedly set in Vegas, I believe.
Yeah.
Did that happen?
Yes, but it happened in a different way than it transpired in the film. And here's what the truth of the matter was. They played the Hilton for several years, and Baron Hilton was very, very loyal to Colonel Parker and Elvis. And one night there was an employee there that got fired. Elvis knew him, and this guy came to Elvis and complained, that he was treated badly and he was fired. And then Elvis said something from the stage, and that really infuriated Colonel Parker, because he badmouthed Baron Hilton and the Hilton Corporation. So yeah, it was definitely World War III. I've actually got a couple of letters, but again, couldn't put in the book. 3 letters from Colonel Parker, just basically saying, okay, you want to separate, you want to break away. Here it is. Here's the contract. And so yeah, essentially it was true, but it didn't go down because he found out that Colonel Parker was a Dutch immigrant. It was because of this employee and Elvis embarrassing the Hilton name publicly.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Because as a reader of all of these things, I had never read where they had this confrontation. I use the word again, but in the end, when Elvis dies, and as I told, Ronnie and Bobby and Jerry Kennedy and those guys, they went to the funeral, but again, they had this moment with Elvis where the friendship dies, or the friendship. They can't go on as true narcotics officers and protecting him. I've listened to the fellows, and matter of fact, I'm going to invite them on the show for next week. And Bobby and Ronnie, and Bob Cantwell passed away, and of course Jerry Kennedy's no longer with us either. But the Petrofessos, and they've been like the story that you mentioned in the last segment. They had that confrontation with Elvis Presley, but. And then it was, but they did go to the funeral. Was Tom Parker at that funeral?
Yeah, he was at that funeral, and keep in mind, Elvis was getting ready to do. He was getting ready to go on the road, and Colonel Parker was doing advance work in Maine, I believe. And so when all that went down. When Elvis passed away, Colonel Parker chose to stay in Maine just for the day so that he could start making some phone calls and start, because he knew that bootleggers would be out there So he made a lot of merchandising deals to bring in money for the estate. And then, of course, he was actually at the funeral, but he was there in a Hawaiian shirt. And, that's what he wore. And that's what he wore all the time. He didn't own a suit. And so he was criticized for that.
Yeah,
but,
I remember that.
To me, he was taking care of business.
TCB.
And, in the book, we say that Elvis would have laughed at the idea that Colonel Parker would have showed up, to his funeral in a Hawaiian shirt. But he was in combat mode. He was still, he was going to grieve later on, and that's exactly what he did.
One of the other people that I had an opportunity to spend time with was Billy Stanley. He I don't know if what's his, who he is in terms of, but he had become an evangelical minister. And he had written a book entitled, I won't come up with a straight one, but about serving two kings, Jesus and Elvis. So I went out of my way. I really wanted to meet him. And his mom married Vernon Presley. You can tell the story much better than I. They met in Germany, right?
That's correct. Yes.
And she was married to another GI.
That's right. Yeah, they were married. She was married at the time that she met Vernon, and Vernon started courting her, and then they got married. So these guys called Elvis brother, but they were actually stepbrothers. He
told me, and I liked him. I wasn't sure what I was going to get, and he came in studio. And FYI, I'm in recovery. I've been sober for 38 years, and we talked about the drug use. And he said to me, and I think his brother's name was David. I can't remember if that's true.
Right.
Is that it? Billy and David?
That's right. Yeah. Ricky, David, and Billy. Yeah.
And he said that they carried the drugs for Elvis, and they called it the football, like the thing that the president has taken along with him. And he said, and we're just sitting there, and I talked about my own sobriety. And he said, if Elvis Presley had not died, he said, me or one of my brothers would have. You're nodding your head. Yeah. That was very powerful.
Right. Yeah. Well, the thing with Elvis was, and he didn't do this with everybody, but he certainly did it with a lot of the women. He wanted everybody to be on the same level as he was. When you dated him, you went to bed at the same time. You were taking the same drugs. During the Hollywood years, they were all taking uppers so that they could get through the day. Now they weren't taking downers with them in the tour years because they had to work. They had actual job to do. But that's kind of where they all kind of diverted. But yes, I totally understand what he's saying.
And as an addict and an alcoholic, you only hung out with addicts and alcoholics. Today, I don't know any, but then everybody I knew was. And I wondered that because the doctors, and I have in recovery once, a guy said to me, he said, Peter, he said, if we'd have had to get our drugs like, what did he say? If Elvis had to get his drugs like we did, he'd have been dead 20 years before because he had physicians, did he not? That Dr. Nick and yeah. What do you do with Dr.
He doctor shopped. And I think Lamar even said his dream was to open a drugstore so that he could just write his own prescriptions.
Lamar Fike.
And that's not to denigrate the man, but it's just to say that he had a very, very strong addiction.
No, Lamar Fike and I had an opportunity to spend a couple hours with Lamar. He told me that. He said that Elvis they're called PDAs. I believe they're called PDAs. And Elvis knew it. I mean, it wasn't like, he was, what's this drug going to do to me? Elvis knew stuff. He
carried a physician's book that was kind of an index for drugs and how they impact you. And he knew it back and forth.
Oh, yeah. When Lamar Fike told me, he said, hey, he said he knew what to ask for. Wow. I'm close to another pause. We come back. I want to talk about Gladys because I've been told that this is awful, that Gladys was alcoholic. You're nodding your head. We'll pick it up there. This is a great read, everyone. Marshall Terrill is with us. He's done a lot. I'm going to get him to, hopefully get him to send me all the McQueen books and others. We'll keep getting them on the show. Elvis and the Colonel, and his publisher is St. Martin's Press, 303-696-1971. In the next segment, we will, you can take calls, and we'll take calls, and you can ask questions about all of these, so much of the stuff that we care. I made a bunch of notes here. I have Lisa Marie and Michael Jackson, Anne Margaret, Priscilla Presley, Elvis and the Beatles, Gladys is an alcoholic, Elvis and Nixon. This is my show prep to ask you these things. All right. Have you ever felt conflicted when someone on the street asks you for money? And I know you want to help, but there is a better way, and it's making a donation to Step Denver. And you can do it right now for Colorado Gives Day at coloradogives.org/StepDenver. And every day men walk through the doors of Step. And I was with Bob Cote for so many years, the late great Bob Cote, who started it all. Right in front of Coors Field, you make a commitment to sobriety, work, accountability. You want to see an answer to homelessness? It's at Step. Stories are unbelievable. I have seen it firsthand for over 40 years. Step Denver's proven solution. I can tell you the men that are worthy of your support are there. This is Colorado Gives Day. Is December the 10th. Step Denver is counting on people like you to invest in men who are investing in themselves, becoming members and contributing members of our community, because Step makes real changes, makes changes happen. Every dollar you donate will be turned into $5 of impact. And since they don't take government funding, your support means so much more. Don't wait for December the 10th. Make your tax-deductible donation today. coloradogives.org/StepDenver. Again, it's coloradogives.org/Denver. Paul and those guys down there are really, really the best. It is a Saturday. I'm Peter Boyles, 710 KNUS. 47 will be the high, 50 Sunday and Monday, 51 degrees. Stay here, 710 KNUS. Oh, I've been so lonely, baby. The King. 710 KNUS. Really special Saturday morning. Boom. 47 will be the high, 50 tomorrow and 51 on Monday. I could cry. The King. A special book, Elvis and the Colonel, an insider's look. Marshall Terrill is our guest. You forget how good that man was, and you forget how much of an impact that had on all of us. We were kids coming up. Marshall Terrill's with us, and he's a great guest. This could turn into for the next 6 or 8 months, you could just be a guest. I could just sit and listen. When we paused and went away, and we will go to a point and get calls, but I asked you about Gladys and asking whether or not Gladys was alcoholic, and your answer, Marshall, was,
"Oh, she definitely was. Actually, yeah. Her alcoholism led to her demise, which was acute hepatitis.
Yes,
and I think she probably suffered from some sort of depression. I mean, you look at the photos of her,
black
she's
eyes,
never smiling.
Yeah.
She always looks like something's going to happen to her boy, and that was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, I'm not the kind of person that reads into things, but I look at those photos of her looking at him, and there's such a bond and a connection, and she just and I think probably some of that came from the fact that he was a twin and they lost the other one, and they probably didn't want to lose this one. So I really feel that probably played into those things.
One of the things that I always wondered about was Vernon, and they kept it hidden that Vernon did time for a bad check, and it was kind of a humbug, but nevertheless he did time. And Elvis, what they're telling me, I got 2 minutes till the break, and we can start all over again. But take 2 seconds here, 2 minutes. Vernon Presley did time, and how many people really knew that he did time?
Well, back then, you kept those sorts of things quiet. So not a whole lot of people knew. Of course, in this day and age, everybody would know, and that now, of course, they do know. But and the other thing too was, doing the book with Sonny, he dealt a lot with Vernon. He said Vernon was a very cold man, and he was the complete opposite of Gladys.
Yes.
And so Elvis grew up with these two extremes as parents. Of course, they both loved him. But I thought that dichotomy was very, very interesting.
Vernon, in essence, lives off of his son. As soon as he starts, he buys him the first house and does those things. And then I've never understood Vernon. I think I understand Gladys, but when Elvis I saw an interview with Elvis, and we're really close to the button, but when Elvis said, my parents are getting too old to work, and I think Vernon was in his early 40s. he's running one on you, kid. Vernon wasn't not a hard worker, was he? Or was he?
Well, I will say this for him. He really did want to look over Elvis's money. He wasn't sophisticated about his money, but he wanted Elvis to save every dime. And he felt that Elvis spent money frivolously, which he did. But putting Elvis in charge of his finances was kind of the death knell for Elvis, because he and Colonel Parker made a deal. He said to Colonel Parker at the very outset of their relationship, "You worry about the money coming in, I'll worry about it going out."
Yeah.
And so his dad, who had an 8th grade education, was watching his money.
Yeah.
And people don't realize this, but in the 50s, there was like Elvis was in a 90% tax bracket.
Yes.
And it wasn't until 1964, I just recently looked this up, there was a bill passed that gave him some sort of relief. So, when we talk about Elvis making $100 million, well, 90% of that was in taxes for probably the first third of his career, and he didn't have any sort of investments, nothing sophisticated.
Yeah, he's not sophisticated. Yeah, he's not.
Yeah,
and
right.
That's what I think.
But he wanted to give his daddy a job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's what it really boiled down to. And, you know, he was respectful to his parents. That's you have to. I am from the South. My mom was from Arkansas. So back then, in that context, in that time, you took care of your family.
Yeah,
you know, that's just kind of how it was.
Yeah. Well, no, it's and people. I once read an essay, and then we got to pause, where why these women in the South were crazy because he was one of them.
Right.
And that makes all the sense in the world. That he came from public housing, in essence, does he not?
Right, he does. It reminds me of that line from Greg Allman, "Mrs. Delta women love me."
Yes. And there's two of a kind. There's two of a kind. And I'm a huge Greg Allman fan too. So, I mean, or for that matter, I had a moment to talk once with with the Marshall Tucker guys, and I had another moment to talk with Leonard Skinner, and that's who they are. They were good old boys that could play.
Yeah, absolutely.
I get now they're telling me to pause. Now I got to do it. Hang on, sir, if you would. Elvis and the Colonel is the book. We can take calls in the segment. Tom Parker's great quote, "The artist always wears the white hat." Colonel Tom Parker. 7:10 KNUS. Don't forget 39th Annual Children's Hospital Toy Run is a week from tomorrow. We'll talk more about that. And with this, a special guest, Elvis and the Colonel. Turn it around. Here we go, kid. We're coming right back after this. Love the Open. The Open's great. Slick Rick Flair, and Bret, the Hitman Hart. All of my idols. Peter Boyle, I got a new idol this morning. Peter Boyle's on the air everywhere. Made it to a Saturday. It is 11 o'clock. 47 will be the high today, says the 710 KNUS Weather Center. Weather 50 on Sunday. Monday's 51. And next Sunday is the 39th Annual Children's Hospital Toy Run. This is a total luck out for me. What a wonderful guest. Do you want to punch him up, please, Adam? You never know what you're going to get in our business. I've said this thousands of times. There's people that you get on a show, you go, man, I wish I hadn't done that. This one, he will be, someday we'll talk. There's people that I met and I said, this is awful. You're horrible. And one of the things that I did find over 1,000 years of doing this, honestly, Marshall, the bigger the name guy, the better the guy is. And I have come to the conclusion that those kinds of folks, if you're lucky enough to get them to do radio shows, they don't have anything to prove. They'll say, please, may I have, those kinds of things. I'd love some more coffee if you get a minute, just stuff like that. And I think, I don't know, but you've been around some pretty powerful characters. Have you found that to be true as well?
Yeah, that's funny you should say that. And you hit upon that correctly. They have nothing to prove. But since you're into boxing, I wanted to tell you a funny story. As you know, I did a couple books with I did a book with Ken Norton and Aaron Pryor.
Oh man.
And and Ernie Shavers. So anyway, I met Muhammad Ali through Ken Norton, and the way I met him in Vegas, it was before a prize fight, and there was a private room, and Norton sneaks in, and Ali is signing autographs. They're all signing autographs. It's going to be for a big autograph show before this big fight. And what does Ken Norton do? He sneaks up on him, dips his finger in his mouth, and gives Ali a wet willy. And and Ali gets up, and he's pretending they're gonna fight and duke it out. And then they see each other and they hug each other. And
oh man,
that was just a great thing. Ali at that point really couldn't talk anymore, but you get those moments.
Yeah.
And it's always fun. But yeah, the ones that are always at the top are always the loosest. I've only heard that from others who are around them. I've introduced guys. I've interviewed guys that were in Paul McCartney's band, and he's just the greatest guy in the world.
Oh yeah.
Because you're right, they have nothing to prove anymore.
I met Ali, a handshake with Ali. We were talking about it last week because we were talking about that television fight with and whether or not it was fixed or whether or not it was a real fight.
I saw that too.
Well, let me sidebar you. Was that? I was lucky enough. Why I used pro wrestlers in the opening. I got to work for Vern Gagne. I worked off and on for a number of years. Did the ring and did television for the old AWA, and a couple of times I got to work for Vince McMahon just doing that as well. And the terms that they use are works and shoots. They are 99.999% of professional wrestling matches are called works. They have it, it isn't like they're choreographed to a degree, but it's still tough. It's really a hard thing to do. But every once in a while, it's called a shoot. And that's where shoot fighters came from Japan. I mean, it's legitimate. Yeah. It's a real fight in the ring. And I've asked a bunch of people that I respect, and I'm going to ask you, was that fight, was that a work or was that a shoot last 2 Saturdays ago?
I think it was a combo. I think Tyson was out to knock him out. He knocked him out in the first 2 rounds because he knew that after that he's going to run out of gas.
Okay.
And then after that, and it's funny we should talk about Tyson because lately I get on my Facebook thing and I see reels and I see his greatest knockouts, and he's always so exciting to watch.
Oh.
And as a matter of fact, I was there the night that for both Evander Holyfield fights, and then I was also there the night that it was it was Tyson and Bruce Seldon. That was the night that Tupac Shakur got killed. Because champion, I was with Aaron Pryor. So champion boxers, they get 2 free fights, 2 free tickets to every championship fight. They can just walk up. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know
and
that.
You'll love this story. So for the first Tyson Evander Holyfield fight, it's in Vegas, and there's a trailer outside, and Aaron Pryor knocks on the door, and Don King actually answers. And I see this tall guy, and I can't hear Aaron, but I know that he's requesting tickets, and he looks at Aaron, and his response is classic. He goes, "Aaron, do you show up today to the Super Bowl and ask for 2 tickets?"
Oh, man.
But get this. He gave us 2 tickets.
Sure. The Kings are like the worst. I mean, but at the same time, we're talking. I've had an opportunity to talk and to meet some of those guys, and they all hate Don King, and they say it's his son, but it's his stepson. And one of the great lines was from Larry Holmes when Tyson just dropped him like a bad habit, and they said, "Champ, what do you remember?" He said, "The King stepping over my body to try and get to Mike Tyson and steal him away." And how much did Tyson sue him? And I don't know. And I had somebody on last weekend, a pretty good guy on fights, and we're talking about Don King. There's a book out about the fight between Billy Conn and Joe Louis, and this guy he's like in your league, he's that good. Of all the fighters that you met, who is your favorite? Who was your favorite?
I liked them all. They were just all different personalities.
Yeah.
Ken Norton was fun because he was one of the few guys that I knew that had fun with his fame.
Yeah.
I'll give you a funny story. So we once went to an Indian casino, and we were in the back. He was going to be the guest at a fight, and we were going to sign books. And we got shown this room where all the tribal chairs were there, and they all looked upon him like he was some god or warrior, and they were in awe. And it's me and him, and about 20 people from the tribe, and they're all kind of, their jaws are dropped. And finally he looks at the tribal chair, and he looks at me, and he gives me a wink. He goes, "Why is the white man always trying to keep us apart?"
Oh, man.
And they fell about the floor, and that just eased everything.
But
he was like. He was a fun guy. And then I also noticed an elderly black couple, and he got up and went over to them and shook their hand. And I said, "Why did you do that?" And he just said, "Because my parents always taught me to respect my elders." Those kinds of things make deep impressions.
How good is good. And we said, I mentioned being in recovery, and I spent a long time with a couple of different guys, but if you remember the name Bone Crusher Smith. And
of course, I met Bone Crusher.
The all-timer. I don't know how to play golf and but they were having golf tournaments raising money for recovery. And Bone Crusher didn't play golf either, but we rode around a golf cart together, and he just told stories. And to be that good and still not be able to, to cut the edge of it. And it's amazing. Now with MMA coming on, what do you think of? I'm just taking you away from the book. I'm sorry. What do you think when when you watch the UFC guys and the MMA guys? What do you do with all of that?
It seems to me like regular boxing is kind of fading to not the background, but like it's now switching to this. So this is what the younger people want.
Yes.
And that's why you haven't seen guys like Ali, Norton, Foreman, Frazier. You're talking 50 years ago.
Oh, no, indeed.
Boxing hasn't had. I mean, Tyson was the last of the glory days, as far as I'm
Yes,
concerned.
Once more, I agree with you. I mean, after Mike, then it just disappears. MMA shows up, and it's gone. And I don't. Marshall Terrill is with us. A remarkable book. The book is entitled "Elvis and the Colonel: An Insider's Look at the Most Legendary Partnership in Show Business." I said we would take calls in this segment. We got jam lines. Coach, you want to take some calls from some listeners? Marshall, did we lose him?
Yes, absolutely.
You'll take calls. Okay. Start with Jack. Jack on line 1. You're with the man, Marshall Terrill. Good morning and thank you.
Yeah, Pete, you mentioned the fact that one of the criticisms of Presley that he was frivolous with his money. Well, one of his frivolities was if he liked you, he bought you a new Cadillac.
Well, we're going to talk about that because that happened here.
Well, I know. Right. That's what I'm going to talk about.
Well, then go ahead.
When he bought a new Cadillac for Don Kenny, and I ran into Don Kenny, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago. And believe it or not, I was at an auto parts store, at a Napa store. And I said to Don, I says, "Are you buying parts for the Cadillac? Do you still have it?" You know, just being funny. And he says, "No." I says, "Well, where is it?" He says, "Well, it's in the Forney Museum." And that was probably 15 years ago. So if any of your Denver people are in the Forney Museum for, just basically to visit the museum, if the Cadillac's there, that's the one Elvis bought for Don Kenny. Anyway, I thought your audience would like that.
Let me tell my end of it, and you talk about that as well, Marshall. So I'm a young guy, traffic reporter, just breaking into the business, and I'm in grad school, and I'm a traffic reporter and a writer. And Elvis gave Jerry Kennedy. Jerry Kennedy got a Lincoln. Ronnie got a Cadillac. His brother, Bobby Petrofesso, he told me the story. He said Elvis said to him, "Bobby, what do you want?" And the Petrofessos are cowboys. And he wanted, you remember when Dodge made like a Camaro, or Ford had an El Rancho, and Dodge made a pickup truck that was, it just didn't look like a pickup truck, but it had looked part like a car, part like a pickup truck. And Bobby said he wanted one of those, and Elvis bought him. He is the only one of those guys that still has a vehicle. Bob Cantwell passed away, but then he bought, I think he bought one for the police surgeon here in town as well. And so I'm doing traffic, and you're right. You're absolutely right. And then he turns around. What the story was he said he was anchoring, I think, Channel 4, Jack, and he said, "Oh, by the way, Elvis, I would like a Cadillac." And then when the TV cast was over, I talked to Don about it, and he said they called from like Rickenbaugh, I think, and they said, "There's a Cadillac here for you." And he thought he was getting jerked around. He thought, no way. And I don't know if he hung up on the guy or blew him off, but they called back and they said, "For real, you have a Cadillac." So the next day I'm doing morning traffic, and I said, "Elvis, I'll take an oil change." I, of course, never got anything out of it, but his car, and by the way, he was a great guy, and all of these guys. I mean, that's who they were, and he gave them those cars. Marshall, what do you make of that moment when he was given cars like that?
Well, it's important to understand he gave away 70 Cadillacs in his lifetime, but I remember Sonny West specifically telling me that story, and the line I'll never forget is, "He did it just to blow the guy's mind."
Wow.
He didn't give it to him out of his goodness of his heart. He just did it because he wanted to blow the guy's mind.
And he did. And then that was a story in Denver for 3-4 days. Jackie, how many days was that a front pager?
Yeah. And Dan, Pete, you and I are 80, and we have too many memories, and we talk too much to each other.
Take care of yourself. All right, brother. Thank you. All right. Next one we go to. This is Dwayne. Dwayne, you're on the show with Peter Boyles, 710 KNUS. Our special guest is Marshall Terrill. Dwayne, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, sir. Always a pleasure to talk to the legend. Now, Elvis had a Lockheed Jetstar that was down in New Mexico in storage for 35 years. It's red and silver, and a young man by the name of Jimmy. His YouTube page is Jimmy's World Aviation, and he bought it for $274,000. And Mrs. Presley was very happy to be there at the auction, and he's turned it into a rolling traveling motorhome. And on the back it says "All Shook Up."
Whoa! Didn't know that either. That's great.
And it's got all the plushies on the inside, the gold trim on all the ashtrays, a microwave that still works, TV that it kind of gets something in there with a VCR, has a lavatory and all, but they put it onto a motorhome frame, and then they wrapped it in vinyl to keep it nice and shiny, and they've driven it all over. They were up at Oshkosh this year, and people were coming in looking through things, and Jimmy also took one of the wings because they had to take it off, and he had stamps made, so everybody has like a key ring with a different number, so you could offset the cost.
Love that.
But it's gorgeous, and of course Elvis was, only one of one. You can't make another Elvis.
Well, the other part of the story here, and Marshall, you write about it, that there was a wonderful, wonderful restaurant called the Colorado Mine Company, and it was owned by great friends of mine, Buck and Cindy Scott, and Buck passed away, and we did but all of us gathered together for a tribute to Buck. And they made a sandwich called Fool's Gold. And it was sourdough bread, it was bacon, it was peanut butter and jelly, if I remember all of that correctly. And the Denver PD guys, and was the chief at the time, and then at the time I think Jerry Kennedy was captain, and Bobby, I think, and Ronnie, those guys were detectives, and Cantwell, I think, was a sergeant. But I know that they brought Elvis in, and he had a Denver cop uniform on. And one of the stories that they told me, and Buck kind of said it as well, that they had set aside a deep back part of the restaurant, and they roped it off. And there was just going to be a special place for those guys to have dinner. And I heard it from two different sources that Elvis Presley got up and he put like a big server's napkin over his arm and went to a couple of tables and said, "May I help you?" Or words to that. No, seriously, because, and they later said, and this goes back to Marshall's work, he could not just sit there and not have people know it was him. That he went around to the tables and everybody's going, "That's Elvis, it's Elvis, it's Elvis." And then in a time period later, I think his airplane was Lisa Marie. Was it not, Marshall? Was it not his?
That's correct.
And he flew to Denver and he wanted to buy sandwiches. And Buck, there was the old airport, Dwayne, you can tell me it was Stapleton, but remember there was, what was that? Was it Combs or somebody that had a special set aside part of that airport?
It wouldn't be surprising. I mean, Stapleton had so many unique things. But don't forget the banana inside that sandwich with the peanut butter and bacon. That's what made it the Elvis.
I was good for you. I was trying to remember. And I was trying to remember. I know it was peanut butter and jelly, and I know it was bacon. Anyhow, so Buck and Buck went out to, I think was it called Combs Gates, Dwayne?
I think so.
And they went out and the jet was there. And as the story Buck told, and they were bringing the sandwiches on the airplane, and Elvis was there and remembered them and everything. And he said, and they were all doing, and they came and they got the sandwiches in Denver, and that's like what an amazing story that was. And that
I remember. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You say, please.
Okay, thank you. Also, you had to file flight plans with the FAA and all weeks in advance. That was before everything was a little bit more unrestricted. But he would fly most anywhere under the radar and everything else, and they just would sit there and have the call sign, "The King," and he would sit there and be able to fly pretty much anywhere in the country at any time without having to file a flight plan of any kind. So when he would land, every airport was going, "Who the hell is the King?" And next thing you know, you'd see the Cadillacs roll up or something else, and he'd be out there smiling and waving at the people. So he was quite the I don't want to say he had an ego, but let us just say that Mount Evans looks like a pebble compared to his styling.
Marshall, your thoughts?
Well, the great story about that was he was bored, and so he said, "Hey guys, let's go there. Let's go have lunch there." And I remember Sonny saying the bill was something like $300 or $400, but the jet fuel was like $8,000. So that blew my mind as well. Just the idea that he was so bored out of his mind, he just wanted to hop on a plane and spend that kind of money and just for a sandwich.
So the payoff on the story, according to Buck, was that he gets on the airplane and Elvis says to him, "Do you know Chuck?" And Charlton Heston had come up for the sandwiches on the plane with, and I think I remember that story. I think Buck told me that story, that here's Charlton Heston on, but he called him Chuck. And I got to meet Charlton Heston. But back to what you were talking about earlier about the big name guys, and Charlton Heston was appearing in Denver at Elitch's in a play for whatever, and I don't remember, but he did the radio show with me, and my son was a little boy, and we watched this movie where, and I don't even remember the title of the film, but this guy had a plantation in South America, and the army ants were coming, and the ants ate everything in their path. I don't know if you guys remember that film, Naked Jungle. The spectators in the room are the best. That comes from Adam Walker, Naked Jungle. So I was telling my son, it was a little boy then, and I said, tomorrow on the show, the old man's going to have the Ant-Man, because that's what. So this is a true story, and so and I told him off the air about my son calling him the Ant-Man. We were sitting in the studio. By the way, he was exactly as Marshall Terrill said. He was just a really, 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 really good man. 2 weeks go by. I get an envelope. Inside is an autographed picture to my son, and Charlton Heston doesn't sign Charlton Heston. He signs the Ant-Man.
Wow.
That's a true story. I mean, that was like, with Marshall, that's those kind of guys, right?
Yeah. And by the way, I have my own Heston story. I have a friend named Kent Twitchell, who's a muralist in Los Angeles, very famous muralist. So he was getting ready to unveil one of Charlton Heston. Of course, I'm a Planet of the Apes guy.
Ooh.
So, and he's just coming out with his book called In the Arena. So what his stuntman, Lauren James, who was Steve McQueen's stuntman, he introduces me to him, and he's sitting down, and he holds his hand up like this, and he kind of bows his head like curtsies, doesn't say a word. I shake his hand. He never says a word to me.
Wow.
And that was my exchange with him.
Wow. They're just guys. And by the way, Dwayne, what a great call this is. I really appreciate you contributing to the show this morning, man. That's cool. Thank you.
Well, I always love doing it. And as the man used to say, thank you very kindly. And we'll listen again soon. Thanks, guys.
All right. Now, we need to break here. Is that what we need to do? Hang on, everybody on the lines. Hang on. We have a line open, 303-696-1971. This is a once-in-a-lifetime good show. This is really special. The man on the other end, you can watch this on Spot Streams this morning. His name is Marshall Terrill, and he has written some great bios. I'm going to try to hook him into the rest of the books. Elvis and the Colonel, 710 KNUS Denver's talk station. Adam, you ready? Get us out of here. We're right back.
At this hour, I'm Christina Owayo in Dallas, and here are your top stories.
President Joe Biden and the First Lady will attend Donald Trump's inauguration in January. Greg Cluxton has the details.
Before the presidential election, the White House said Joe Biden would attend the inauguration of the next president regardless of who won. And now, a spokesman confirms that will be the case when Donald Trump takes the oath of office on January 20th. Andrew Bates says the president believes in the peaceful transfer of power and that he and the First Lady are going to honor that promise and attend the inauguration. Greg Clugston, the White House.
It appears to be taking longer for some young adults to find jobs in the United States. According to recent Labor Department data, the share of employed Americans between 20 and 24 years old declined the most of any age group last month compared to 2023. That was followed by a slightly smaller decline among people 25 to 34 years old compared to last year. Unemployment remains historically low, and there are still more job openings than before the pandemic. However, economists say the reason younger adults are having trouble is because of the Great Stay. It's when companies are very slow to hire and very slow to fire. Economists say workers who experience career setbacks so early on face potential losses in lifetime earnings.
That's what you need to know at this hour. In Dallas, Christina Owayo, Salem News Channel.
I think it's the Jordanaires in the background. High class. Mama Thornton's tune and the king of rock and roll. Got a rabbit. No friend of mine. Elvis and the Colonel. Our guest is Marshall Terrill. His publisher is St. Martin's Press, and it's a home run. Good morning, everybody. 47 the high, 50 and 51. You never caught a rabbit. You ain't no friend of mine. Bring Marshall up and then before we go back to the callers. Hey, I got to ask you again, what are you working on next? Which of your books are coming next?
I've got 3 books coming out in 2025, and it just happened to fall that way. But the first one is on a serial killer by the name of Charles Schmid. He committed these crimes in the mid-'60s, and he was married to a lady who went into hiding for 50 years, and then she contacted me. And I was familiar with the story already. So that's coming out in March, and then I'm doing a biography of Jay Sebring. And Jay Sebring was the guy that introduced men's hair design to the United States. But most people know him as a Manson family victim.
Yes. Murdered by...
And then I've got a coffee table book, and I'm doing it with the widow of actor Steve McQueen. It's going to be the making of his last 2 films, Tom Horn and The Hunter. and that's coming out in November of 2025.
I love Tom Horn. I love that film.
And by the way, I just wrote something. If you want me to read you an excerpt that no one else has ever read or listened to, I'd be happy to do it because
please.
I've been talking to Beau L'Amour, who's the son of Louis L'Amour.
Yeah. Oh.
And he gave me some fantastic information.
I used to do, when I worked at a radio station, KOA, when Denver's stock show was, it's still a great event, but we would take a radio show there for a week. And I met Louis L'Amour, and he sat and did a couple of hours on the air. And I probably read 3 or 4 of his books. Louis L'Amour goes back to the theme that we've been speaking about. He was Louis L'Amour, and he was as kind and as you could want. He was not impressed with that he was Louis L'Amour. If you would, Marshall, please take it from here.
All right, this is a. Let me find it for you. Okay, so McQueen, before he announced Tom Horn, he had to make sure that that he had the resources in place. So this little segment's called Back in the Saddle Again. Before Steve McQueen announced his pet projects to the world, he rolled up his sleeves and commenced his research to see if he could deliver something special to the silver screen. He tried hard to recruit Western novelist Louis L'Amour, his favorite author, as a consultant on the project. He was very nice, L'Amour's widow said Kathy. Sometimes he and Louis would go on a break and take lunch together at the Bel Air Hotel. They'd drive over in this old pickup truck, and the hotel would make them park around the back because they thought Louis L'Amour and Steve McQueen were delivery men.
It's great.
L'Amour's son, Beau, who was a teen at the time, thought the superstar was a handyman when he saw his car parked outside their home, which was in Los Angeles. Quote, at the time, McQueen was difficult to recognize as the actor who appeared in The Sand Pebbles and Bullet because he had gained weight and had long hair and a beard, L'Amour said, but his eyes gave it away. There was no doubt you were looking at Steve McQueen. McQueen's down-home personality also shone through, according to Beau L'Amour. I remember Dad being kind of surprised that Steve McQueen drove a 1950s pickup truck, and I had to explain to him that it was a very special, customized pickup, L'Amour said. Sometime later, McQueen popped the hood and described to me what he had done to the engine. We also lay on the ground and looked underneath. We talked a bit about cars in general. I was still a kid. I don't even think I was driving yet, but my uncle had been racing professionally since the 50s, and I had a good deal of knowledge and curiosity. L'Amour was an aspiring filmmaker, and McQueen offered to take him for a visit to the Warner Brothers editing room to observe the process for a film he believed was an enemy of the people.
Wow.
Quote, that never materialized because Mom and Dad were careful with their kid around Hollywood types, willing to socialize, but always wanting to personally keep an eye on everyone's behavior, a wise approach. L'Amour said the two men possibly met through McQueen's first wife, Neil Adams. I'm not sure how McQueen and my father actually met, whether it was contact through an agent or manager. Dad actually had gone on a few dates with Neil Adams during their time she was working in Kismet on Broadway, said L'Amour, who was a writer and producer. But I believe that he just broke up with Julie Newmar and eventually headed back to Los Angeles. L'Amour said his father and two men came from the same era, although 22 years apart, and were cut from the same cloth. Both men grew up during hard-bitten times. Two men worked for the circus, tried their hand at boxing, were merchant seamen, saw military service. L'Amour served in World War II. McQueen served post-World War II, but before Korea, and eventually stumbled into entertainment. L'Amour, this is the special part, L'Amour, who has his father's journals, noted his father and McQueen met for dinner at a restaurant inside the Tony La Hermitage Hotel in Beverly Hills on December 14, 1975. Doubtful this meeting was for Tom Horn. Quite possibly, it was for American Flag, an original concept by novelist Elmore Leonard. McQueen had optioned the material a few years before, a buddy film in the vein of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which was set in 1910 in the small mining town of Mojave County, Arizona. Leonard met with McQueen after he first optioned it in March of 72. He recounted, I wrote a 20-page outline, which McQueen optioned. When I first met him, he had an accident riding his dirt bike out in the desert the day before, and he slipped his pants down to show me this huge scrape on his hip that he bandaged. While we were talking about the movie, he was going with Alan McGraw, and he wanted her in the picture. Nothing ever happened. A memo from Paul Schrader, who wrote coverage for Columbia Pictures, the studio, considering the film, thought the 139-page script was interesting, but found it a, quote, lukewarm piece of material. Schrader, who later wrote Taxi Driver and directed American Gigolo, had an especially hard time swallowing the ending where the two males of the picture end up ditching the beautiful lead. Quote, as for the notion that the two buddies join hands together to reject their old girlfriend, the only girl in their lives, we leave that to the Freudians, Schrader wrote. So it kind of just goes on and on. Yeah, and but his meeting with Louis L'Amour prompted him to take on Tom Horn, which again I knew that he did research there, but I didn't know that it gave him the confidence to do Tom Horn, and that's the big thing. And here we are, 45 years later, and the more you dig, the more you start to understand these things.
When that film, and I go to Wyoming, love Wyoming, and going to Wyoming, and Frontier Days, we took the show up to Frontier Days for, 15, 20 years. And they still argue, the really good historians for Wyoming still argue about whether or not Tom Horn killed those. No, I'm serious. I mean, I
know you are.
I've sat, not that I could ever input, but I've sat with Western historians in the Hitching Post, which was the epicenter of Cheyenne Frontier Days, and it's closed now and it burned, and the owner was really a remarkable guy, but we would always stay at the Hitch. And I sat one time with these guys who argued about, he was a regulator. They argued about Tom Horn, and I loved the film. I thought the film was great. And of course, folks know this, that Tom Horn was hung and denied doing it. So I'm going to ask you this and then we'll break. Do you think Tom Horn killed that he was a kid? It was a young, 12-year-old kid or 13? Right. Did he do it?
Yeah, he was 13. I don't believe he did, but here's what makes it messy, is that Horn killed 17 people.
Yes, he did. I know that. Yeah. I know that.
So that's where, but I don't think he killed this kid just shooting him for no reason. He hunted down people, and he took pride in that, but this kid had nothing to do with anything.
But that was the big thing, and that's why they hung him, right? Was for the death of that, or the shooting of that kid.
Right.
Yeah.
What happened was that he was so messy in his job. He was hired to bring in these rustlers that were stealing cattle.
Yeah.
He had some shootouts in town in front of people, and the city fathers decided, no, this is getting too messy. I think he was framed.
I mean, I can't tell you how important this show is. Hang on, I got to do a quick turnaround. We'll come back again. This is Elvis and the Colonel, the book, but you can see what an encyclopedia Marshall Terrill truly is. And folks on the phones, hang on. We'll come back and get your calls next. And it is just a really significant morning. I got someplace to go when this is over, and I'm having a great day. I'm happy to talk to you about my friends at Water Pros. And Water Pros cares about the quality of your water, and you can remove forever chemicals and microplastics and hard water with Water Pros. And they have called this the Peter Boyles Special. And for now, the price to you can go, oh, look at that, $3,195. But this is a gift that would go for, as long as you go. You get a whole water softener. You get point-of-use reverse osmosis drinking water systems. They're all fully installed. Start the process. First things first, waterpros.net, and sign up for your free in-home consultation. That means for nothing, they did it for us. You'll come to your house, they'll test your water, answer all of your questions and concerns about your water. Way before you do anything else. You can take this test. I mean, it's a gimme, and that's a great one. These guys are like, you can trust. Water Pros, family-owned, veteran-owned business dedicated to providing you with the best water treatment and far less than the other guys. go to. Let them come and let them do that free water test. First step. From there, you do what you wish, but really have them look. 303-862-5554, 303-862-5554, 303-862-5554. Set the appointment. They'll come to your house. It's that simple. Waterpros.net, 303-862-5554. the king. Now or never. Come hold me tight. 710 KNUS. This will be a show I certainly will remember. It made it happen. It's going to be 47:50 tomorrow. On the line with us is Marshall Terrill and his latest book, with more to come this year, next year, Elvis and the Colonel, an insider's look at the most legendary partnership in show business. I know this is our final segment. It is 11:52. I think we got about 6 minutes. Marshall, what would you like to say or talk about that I overlooked? And if you would, please.
Well, you brought up a point on the back cover of the book, and this really kind of the crux of the book. It said there's a quote: "The artist always wears the white hat." And what Colonel Parker meant by that was, I'll take all the heat, I'll take all the blame, as long as Elvis is the hero. I don't mind being that guy. And a lot of Colonel Parker's reputation, he was definitely the heavy, and he didn't mind playing the heavy. As a matter of fact, he felt like he would use that for his benefit when he negotiated on Elvis's behalf. So, over time, a lot of music critics and people have looked at Colonel Parker in a certain way. And when I did the book with Greg McDonald, our goal was to say that was his persona, but the real guy is this person. And that person was fair. He was loyal to Elvis. You read in the intro of the book that when Brian Epstein died in 1967, the Beatles called Colonel Parker to ask him to manage them, and he said, "I can't. I've got one client, and it's Elvis Presley." Yeah. So we say in the book that was a testament to his greatness, but him turning down the Beatles was a testament to his loyalty to Elvis. And the fact of the matter is, Elvis would not have been on top of the music scene and in the public spotlight all those years had it not been for Colonel Parker.
What did Parker do after Elvis died? What did he do with the rest of his life?
Well, he retained he was retained by Baron Hilton, and he moved to Las Vegas, and he gave advice to people, but he was also on the payroll in terms of entertainment. For example, Steve Wynn was asking Colonel Parker for his advice in Vegas. And Colonel Parker said, "I got my eye on a little girl named Celine Dion. You might want to check her out." Wow. So he mentioned that to Steve Wynn signed her. Rest is history. If you recall, when George Strait first broke out, he was asking Colonel Parker what he should do, and he said, "You ought to get into movies." And so he made that movie Pure Country, which was a big hit. On video, and not necessarily on, but it helped spread his fame. And so he basically he said, about Elvis, when you've had the best, you can't go anywhere else. So he was able to live quite comfortably after Elvis's death. But basically, he lived in Las Vegas. Greg said that he went to a lot of openings. He liked being around the action still. And so I think he was brokenhearted, to be honest with you. I think he was brokenhearted after Elvis died. He devoted 24/7 of his life to Elvis, and then all of a sudden, that's just cut off. It's like the only thing I can think of is cold turkey. That's the term that comes to mind.
My final Elvis connection in pro wrestling, there is a man named Jimmy Hart, who they called the Mouth of the South, and he was a manager, loudmouth. He was a wonderful guy, and he also was in the music business for a while. And I got along with him really well. We talked quite a bit. And in Memphis, he told me Elvis was a huge pro wrestling fan and would come to the wrestling matches and sit with the light man up above the rings and look down. And I said, "Wow." And Hart said, he was the best guy to be around. They all the wrestlers, he said, they all loved Elvis and Elvis loved them. And he said, in many ways, he said, we were kind of in the same business. That was a great line. So all the stories that have been told today by you are just incredible. And this store is open. I want you back as soon as I know the McQueen thing you're going to do and the rest of these books. Marshall, you've really put some work out there, man. Congrats.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I like covering 20th century icons. I think you and I agree on that. These guys were something special. That's why they kind of live on, because nobody has replicated them. You know, it takes a good 10, 20 years for these legends to develop, but that's what happens after they pass. People start to realize, well, no one's going to be like that person again.
No. And for a kid that grew up like I grew up, and to sit in rooms with those kinds of people that we're talking about, that was really tremendous for me too, to say, man, I used to, watch you on television or, listen to your music. And then you're sitting in a room and they got their feet up and they're talking to you. And you realize they're just like everybody else except fill in the blank, right?
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
This store is always open anytime. And I got to thank you. I mean, I was looking forward to this, and you are better than as advertised. So
well, thank you so much.
Now you're a tremendous interview. So, and I tell people, I said about the show, and I said, remember one thing, jockeys are only as good as their horses. I had a hell of a horse today. I had a hell of a horse.
Oh, thank you. I love that. That was funny.
No, we live by that. Like, jockeys are only as good as their horses. And I had one hell of a horse this morning. Take a bow, Marshall Terrill. We'll see each other again, I promise.
Absolutely.
I believe you live in Arizona. Is that true?
That's right. I live in Phoenix. I work for Arizona State University. So in addition to my job as an author, I'm a reporter for the university.
We'll see each other because that ain't that far away, right? Motorcycle season's coming.
That's right.
Merry Christmas. Take care of yourself, and thank you for doing the show. It really means
my pleasure.
Lot. Okay, take care, sir.
Absolutely.
All right. So thank you. So we started the show this morning at 9 with Kelly Michaels talking about disc jockeys and music and what it did to you or for you in your life. Let's go back to that, although it's open lines. But what disc jockeys did you listen to growing up? Cities, call letters, formats, and what changed you? And we talked about when Elvis hit. Woo! And then people were talking about when the Beatles hit. Woo! And then what did they bring up? Jimi Hendrix, I think, was the other name. And it just goes from there. I had a list of things I'm showing you that I never got to. You can get the guy back on the show. But the book is entitled Elvis and the Colonel. I'll hold it up there for the folks at home to see it. And we'll turn around and come back and we'll do open lines. 303-696-1971. And again, a week from tomorrow, the 39th Annual Children's Hospital Colorado Toy Run. And it is Sunday, December the 8th. As the man said, the toy run is on, rain, snow, or shine. And we've ridden in all of those. So you ready? You're ready. Take the turn. We come back. We have one line open, 303-696-1971. Can't get any better than those last couple of hours. And do I say good afternoon yet? Indeed, I do. 5 minutes after the hour, 12 o'clock. So good afternoon, everyone. Lines are jammed, and it's just been a great morning for what talk radio ought to be, as someone said. The weather, 47, the high today, 50 on Sunday, Monday, 51. It's going to be in the high 40s, early 50s for a week from tomorrow for the Children's Hospital Toy Run, and we'll be talking more about that. So I knew what we were going to do this morning with Elvis and the Colonel, and I thought it would be fun, and it's been great to talk about people and to talk about growing up under that music. And I'm old enough when Elvis hit, and other people talk about being that, that what happened when the Beatles hit, or someone brought up Jimi Hendrix. We're living in a different time in the 50s, and this guy shows up, and there were people on radio, on AM, because FM had not merged yet, and they were called disc jockeys or DJs, and they played records for a living, and played music and news and commentary. And I was a traffic reporter, and then again, how it worked. And we worked, clubs later in the night, different places. And those are books that will never be written. But the idea of a DJ, and it really comes out of the 30s, but the golden age of radio really is the 30s and 40s. And the disc jockeys really, DJs, as people call the abbreviations for people who played records on the air, they came out of what happened because of television. Real quick, and then the questions are, who'd you grow up on, and the music and how it affected your life. But what happened to radio, as a reader and a listener to some of the guys that went through it, radio during the Second World War was really the golden age of radio, and leading up into the 40s, and then for just a few years after the end of the war, and then along comes television. Well, all the great names of radio, Jack Benny, and you get on the list of all these wonderful people who had radio shows, Abbott Costello, and the list goes on. They moved to television, and music had changed. The people like Nat King Cole came along, and Sinatra to a degree, but it went on. And the bands, there was union issues, and it went on from there. So all of these guys make this transition. Bob Hope, they make a transition to Milton Berle, make a transition into television. So it leaves these enormous gaps, and along comes rock and roll music and disc jockeys. And at that point, it's going to be what it's going to be. Same thing happened again, of course, and AM radio was left out in the open, because what had happened is MTV comes along and kills AM. AM music goes to FM. What comes out of that? Talk radio. Talk radio, without people understanding what it was going to do, filled the gap. And so it became the time of talk radio. And now the talk radio variable was kind of slipping into the Joe Rogans of the world onto podcasting. So one will always lead to the other. So, but I was asking people, who'd you grow up on in the cities and calls, but what the music did to you? And Frank has been waiting. And so, Frank, you're on the show. Good afternoon, and thank you.
Well, thank you, Peter. Great interview with that guy.
He was something else. Yeah,
he's just super in his detail. And I was going to ask him what led him to bio. He's so good at people, though. And I think that when you listen to a guy like that, they take on or achieve a different level of looking at the person and what drives them. And Elvis was so complicated, but he was so energetic. The music just moved him. He had a kind heart, I think, and it was an interesting balance between he and the Colonel.
Yeah, this guy, I always thought the Colonel was a heel. Now, every once in a while there's a revision in history, and he tells a whole separate story. And for what it's worth, it's really a good read.
I thought that line that Elvis said to him, You just worry about bringing in the money, and I'll worry about how it goes out.
That's it.
That kind of tells you who was the boss.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I'm enough of a Freudian to. Here's a kid that comes out of public housing. His old man went to jail. He, go down the list of things, and he's who he is, and he turns into this monster, as we say in the business. He's not sophisticated. He's not had anyone sit him down and say, well, this is how the money gets spent, and this is how you dodge taxes and stuff. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I think he is extremely complex. At the same time, I think he's really unique, and he changed the face of music.
I think I heard Marshall interviewed by someone else one time, and he told a story about the Colonel having to come to Elvis to try to change his mind about something that Elvis seemed dead set on, and he handled him like with kid gloves.
Yeah.
He was very soft, but he kind of let Elvis know where he was coming from and why they needed to go a different tack. So he was a very good psychologist with Elvis. I didn't catch the first part of the interview though, and I was going to ask him if he'd ever been to Tupelo.
I bet he had. I mean, I would guess that he did, because the way he writes the book, he didn't go to Europe or anything like that. But boy, he sure.
So he never met him live though. This is all post.
He did not. That's
well,
right.
There's a place in Tupelo called Tupelo Hardware where Elvis bought his first guitar. His mother.
I thought his mother,
bought him his first guitar, and they had this case there and the footprints where he stood roughly, and it's an old glass case, and they've got a replica guitar in there, and that's what they make their reputation on. But it was very complex, that early thing. And Bio is often that. They used to have a television show here, in Denver stations about bios, and it's often the first years that set the course for the whole person.
You bet.
For the whole life.
That's right.
And of course, events, but that's what it is. But that was a great interview.
Oh,
Thank
you're
you
kind.
for having him on.
Thank you, Frank, for listening. Let me jump to Terry. Terry, you're on the show. There's a line open. 303-696-1971. Terry, good afternoon.
Hi, Pete. I just wanted to go back. I was really young, and I've studied some of the pictures when Elvis was in the White House with Nixon. You have the idea. I mean, if you go back, you know more than me about that one. But I mean, what is your opinion of that? And would you have loved to have been in the room for that?
There's. I'm trying to. It was either Jeb Stuart Magruder or Eagle Crow or one of those guys who wrote that book, who did the radio show with me when the book came out, and they did a television movie entitled, but the book was entitled When Elvis Met Nixon. And you ever see that picture of Elvis and Nixon? He's got one of those Batman suits on, and he's standing next to Nixon. Look at his eyes.
The photos are amazing.
He's on Jupiter. I mean,
yeah,
he's so high, and I love that story. And Nixon has no idea, what's going on. But the story.
Did he just show up cold turkey? I mean, did he just show up? But what I'm saying is, did he just show up at the White House and, hey, I'm here? Or?
Not knocked on the door. Yeah.
He just knocked on the door. Yeah.
I mean, he decided that there's all kinds of parts about that story, but he wanted to get badges. He wanted to turn all of his Memphis Mafia guys into narcs. And he wanted to be a narc. And here's a guy, look at the drugs he's doing, right? And he wants to be a narc.
It's crazy. It's a crazy story.
But it's a great story. Yeah.
What do you think Nixon thought? I mean, what was your opinion of his?
Well, they had somebody talked him into it. And it was like they called them the White House Nazis, that said this would be really good for young people to see him with Elvis, without realizing that young people would move to Jimi Hendrix, and they'd move to the Grateful Dead, and they'd move to, what we called acid rock, and that Elvis is really playing for, middle-aged people at that point. And Nixon has no clue. He doesn't. But the cool part of that story was the part about the gun, where Elvis Elvis is always packing heat, and he's carrying I think it was a 45 1911s, all slicked up, and so he's going to go to the potty before he's going to go in and see Nixon, and he's got that one of those nudie Batman suits on. So he goes to the bathroom and he starts unbuckling all the rigmarole, and the gun falls out in front of the Secret Service guys.
Oh, geez.
And he kind of chagrins, and he picks the heater back up. He sticks it back in his pants, and they go in to see Nixon. They didn't take the gun from him. No, it's a great story. And then he loots Nixon's desk. Nixon had tie clasps or something that he gave out. Nixon went and sat down at what do they call it? The desk that is there. That he sat down at Nixon's desk, started opening open up the doors in the desk and taking stuff out, and it ended up he and Nixon got along, which makes it even better.
Was that 71, Pete? Were you talking about 71 at that point or not?
You know, I don't know what year it was. Look, maybe Adam can look. What year at that Nixon? The other story that was in that 1970. You're there. Was when and there's a new book, and it's like I don't want to say an autobiography because it isn't, but it's Jerry Lee Lewis, and Bob Lee and I, my mentor, we emceed Jerry Lee at it was a place called it was called the Warehouse, I think. And we would get hired to, go out there and talk and introduce the act. And he's playing the Warehouse. And they said, "Hey, would you guys like?" And he had made a comeback. You remember a song called "Middle Age Crazy"?
Maybe I don't know if I do or not.
But it was Jerry Lee, and he had gone to ground for a while, and he came back with this song called. See if you can find it, if you would. It's called "Middle Age Crazy." Trying to still prove he still can, and so he's back out on the tour, and so me and the old man are there, and he's got the tightest band, and they're doing like a bunch of different Jerry Lee hits, and he doesn't come out, and he doesn't come out, and he doesn't come out, and then finally, like 20 minutes before the show, or the show was supposed to start. And they open up the dressing room door, and the place is dark. And that was the time of, like double knits and big hair. And it was just, and plus I was with the old man, and they had those, we used to call them pin lights, those flashlights and they're leading him. They're pointing the lights to his feet. And he's cooked. And he gets up and he sits down. He makes a big noise on the piano. And he said something on, if we ever meet, I can tell you what he said, but I can't say it on the air. And then he just started to play, and he killed it. I mean, he absolutely killed it. And I mean, you forget how many hits the guy. So anyhow, so the show, he never talks, he just plays. So it's over, and I want to meet him. It's because I loved him when I was a kid. Great Balls of Fire, It was
he was amazing.
It's Jerry Lee.
Yeah.
And they said no. And I said, I said, I want to shake his hand. No.
Gee.
And they wouldn't let us in. But as the story goes, Elvis called him the day before he died. He called him up, and he said he wanted to see him. And Jerry, in true Jerry fashion, decides he's going to go get ripped, and then he's going to go over to Graceland and see Elvis. And by the time he gets to the gates are locked, and he puts on a big hoorah, and the cops get him, and he's got guns, and he shouldn't have guns, and all the rest of it. So he never knows what Elvis wanted, and the next day Elvis was gone. So he's married to like his 15th wife or whatever she is. And they had a farm in Tennessee. According to this, it's a really lengthy book, but it's very good. And he goes, and they're eating acid, and it's a thunderstorm. And he claims that he saw Elvis in the thunderstorm. Jerry Lee did, yeah. I mean, I love Jerry. And they just auctioned. He had a Harley 74 that one was given to him. I think one was given to Elvis with they used to call them buddy seats and those big, big seats. And then I was on Meekum. I think it was on the Meekum one. And I tuned in to watch it. And he came out and of course he's gone, but it was rough. But he had this motorcycle, an old, like, I think it was even a tank shifter. And they sat down and played the piano. I thought, that's a good way to go, man.
Hey, Pete, just real quick, just for grins and giggles, do you think Nick Bockwinkel ever met Elvis?
Wow.
Because he was a wrestling fan, I wonder, because Nick, I know you knew Nick, right?
Real well.
Yeah, I wonder if he ever got a chance to meet him.
Oh, I never knew that story until it was Jimmy Hart, who they called the Mouth of the South. And remember that song, Keep On Dancing, Keep On Dancing?
Oh, yeah.
Jimmy Hart was the lead singer on that song. And yeah.
Wow.
And I'm asking you to play that one too, to Keep On Dancing. But he told me that Elvis would come, and who was the guy? Jerry Lawler, the King. Jerry Lawler ran Memphis Wrestling, and that Elvis would sit up where the light guy was, and he'd watch pro wrestling. He was I don't want to say he was a mark, but he it'd be interesting if they, of course, all those guys are gone now, but.
Pete, I heard Flair talked one time about Nick Bockwinkel, and he would always say, "We're going out to entertain the 8 to 5 people." Oh. What do you mean by 8? You go out to entertain the 8 to 5 people.
The people who worked from 8 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock at night. That's Wicked Nick. I can't. His father's name was Warren, Warren, Warren Bockwinkel. And he was the tag team partner for Gorgeous George.
Oh, yeah.
And first of all, Nick was way smart. And he'd come in, do the radio, and then we would talk and stuff. But he said, because he as a boy growing up, and I think Nick played football at Oklahoma, I think is where he ended up playing football. But he knew Gorgeous George. And George, of course, changes everything as well. But George came to their house when he was a kid, and they told stories. George Wagner was I think it was his real last name. He was what in recovery we call a periodic, and he would go along for a while and not drink. He'd get a bankroll. He'd go to Vegas, and then he'd end up inevitably marrying a showgirl or something, whatever he would do. But he was, as Nick and those guys would say, if it wasn't for George, that they would have not been where they were. It's like guys talking about Elvis or talking about, Ric Flair or talking about Joe Louis or, they were just, or Elvis Presley. They just, when George hit on television, and remember, it's a one camera shoot and was DuPont. And I've read the history where the ring was the ring, but they only needed one camera. It was a one camera shoot.
Right.
And they used to have to cement those cameras into the ground. And that's one of the reasons that they picked up pro wrestling. As it was.
Well, I'll tell you, when we were little, Pete, we'd watch Channel 2 on a regular basis every Saturday. I think it was every Saturday morning, right?
Oh, yeah, sure.
It was every Saturday morning. They'd have them on, and then you got a chance. Was it the Coliseum where they did the wrestling?
I did the promos. We were at the Auditorium Arena.
Auditorium, right?
And then when I had the chance to work for Vern, when I had a chance to work for Vince, we were at the Pepsi Center then, or McNichols. We went to McNichols. But when I first got to do to work, it was the Auditorium Arena, and that's where I met Nick and. Well,
it was a show, Pete. When we were little, you'd see him walk through the crowd, and it was amazing.
Oh, no cops. It was
crazy.
I got a story about being in Casper, Wyoming. No cops. And that was my Bobby Heenan night, man, when I can't do it on the air, but it was like and that's, you know, and then they kind of Heenan took me under his wing and smartened me up. Bobby Heenan, and you remember a guy named Jack Lanza, Blackjack?
Yeah, I do remember him.
Jack and Bobby were the guys. I mean, I was onto it, but I wasn't onto it like we were. I'm trying to write this stuff. I was sitting ringside my very first night. I did it. I was working for Gene Reed, and Gene was the local promoter for Vern. And it's a true story. And I had the ring bell, and I had a bunch of other stuff I was supposed to do, and I was pulling it off. But it came to, I think it was the last match of the night. And I'm sitting ringside, you know, your nose is on the ring apron. And I watched the ref go into his pocket and pull out the razor blade.
Oh, God.
And I went, the ref's in on it. and he slid, and they call it juicing, you know, they'll call it juicing or going to the blade, but juice is the word they use. And I watched him, and he gave it to Dusty Rhodes, and Dusty juiced. And, because that's one of the nights when.
What year is that? What year was that?
God, I'm trying to remember it myself.
70s, maybe.
Yeah, no, it was in the. I'm guessing 77, maybe. Okay. Yeah. 78, and then I did it well enough that they said, "You want to go with us?" and of course I do. And, you know, I would do 5 cities and Casper, Cheyenne, Denver, the Springs, Pueblo, and then sometime once or twice I think I went to Albuquerque. But I can tell you this, brother, man, I never had a better time. that was like we think all the good
Nick
times.
Funny? Was Nick Bockwinkel funny to be around?
Nick was great. And there's a story that I got to clean it up, but we were done. It was the Auditorium Arena, and his partner, he had a guy named Ray Stevens, and I'm a big Ray Stevens fan, just great. He was a true lunatic, and there was Bobby, me, Wicked Nick, and Ray. And we were in the back part of the dining room, all away from everybody else. And this guy, got to clean up this story. I don't know how I can do it, but this guy came in, and you could tell he had all kinds of afflictions. He might have had, I don't know what diseases he had, but he was pulling a leg and pulling an arm, and he had an autograph book, and he was coming up to. I've never told the story on the air. He's coming up to the table. And he wanted Nick's autograph. And Nick says to Heenan, get him away from me. And he gets angry. Get him away from me. So get him. Don't let him. I'm watching all of this. And they run this guy off. And I said, I'm looking at him. I said, champ. He said, watch. Next time we're back. And he told me, he said, if I'd have given him my remember, he's a heel. He said, if I'd have given him my autograph, he said, I would have been diminished. Number 2, he said, he'd have thrown it away. Now he's going to go home and tell everybody about what Nick Bockwinkel did to him. He's going to be a hero. Bigger than hell. Next month or 3 weeks later, we're working in Denver. And Nick only was a main event guy. He was the champion. So he's in the ring, and he looks at me. Here's all of these guys. There must have been 10 guys sitting ringside, and there was the guy.
Oh, wow.
And he had, I don't know what ringside was, $20 or whatever it was. But, and all these guys, you could tell there was a home somewhere that they all were in. And they were screaming at Nick and yelling at Nick. And Nick looks at me and he said, what'd I tell you? True story. True stories. I mean, because I remember I was shocked. And you know, and Bobby's pushing me, hey, man, just let it go, you know. And I said, no, you know, he said, and Nick said, you watch. He said, he'd have thrown my autograph away. He said, and I would have broke kayfabe. He said, I'd have been a good guy. He said, I'm Nick Bockwinkel, you know, the world's heavyweight champion. And he ran the guy off.
You're a wealth. You're a wealth, my friend. Thank you so for the memories.
Thank you. Great call. I hadn't said.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
You're kind. All right. So we have one line open, 303-696-1971. Ready? Want to do this? Well, how about this? Let me do this because I gotta do this. And if you ever feel conflicted when somebody on the street asks you for money, yes, and I know you want to help, but there's a much better way, and it's making a donation to Step Denver, which you can do right now for Colorado Gives Day at coloradogives.org/StepDenver. Every day, men walk through the doors of Step. And as I said before, it's Mike Rosen that introduced me to Bob Cote. It became such a commitment to Bob and the commitment to sobriety and work and accountability that Step puts out. And the stories that you hear at Step are unbelievable. I've seen it firsthand for over 40 years, actually 38 years. Step Denver is a proven solution. I can tell you that the men they serve are worthy of your support. And so Colorado Gives Day is December the 10th. Step Denver is counting on people like you to invest in men who are investing in themselves. Become a contributing member of the community. Step makes real changes happen. Every dollar you donate turns into $5 of impact. And since they don't take any government funding, that was Cote's rule, your support means so much more. So don't wait for December the 10th. Make your tax-deductible donation today, coloradogives.org/StepDenver. It is coloradogives.org/StepDenver. coloradogives.org/StepDenver. And help the guys out. I think they're going to do the radio show with Billy and Jeff probably sometime this coming week. All right. 710 KNUS. I'm Peter Boyles. 47 will be the high. 50 tomorrow. Everybody, it's 12:32. Good afternoon.
At this hour, I'm Christina Owayo in Dallas, and here are your top stories.
U.S. Airlines is preparing for a holiday rush, and so is the Post Office, the UPS, and FedEx. That's because shipping companies will deliver about 2.2 billion packages to homes and businesses across the United States from Thanksgiving through December 31st, according to the president of Ship Matrix. That's down from 2.3 billion packages last year, most likely because the shopping period is 1 week shorter than it was in 2023. Consumers are shopping further ahead of Black Friday, and more purchases are taking place in physical stores. The number of holiday package shipments grew 27% in 2020 and by more than 3% in the following year during the pandemic. According to AAA, almost 80 million Americans are expected to travel over the Thanksgiving holiday, starting a couple of days ago and ending this Monday. A AAA spokesperson says this year's predictions set a new record. Of the 80 million that are expected to travel, 71.1 million will be driving and taking advantage of the lower gas prices. Last year, the national average was $3.26 a gallon. This year, they will continue to fall. The best time to travel is today, on Thanksgiving Day. The worst days were Tuesday and Wednesday afternoon. As for flights, air travel will also set a record, up 2% from last year.
That's what you need to know at this hour. In Dallas, Christina Owayo, Salem News Channel.
Jerry Lee. Trying to still prove he still can. What a great tune. Got boots. Hey. One more. Here comes the words. Middle-aged crazy. Trying. It's Saturday, November the 30th, 2024. I'm Peter Boyles. This has been one of the shows that I think I will always remember. Tyler, you're on the air. Good afternoon, brother man, and thanks for calling.
How are we doing, man? This has been a great time. I appreciate it. I'm putting together this ridiculous tool chest and have a great time listening.
Well, you're kind, but thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm 45. I remember my youngest days being exposed to music was Elvis Presley. My great grandmother, she was his biggest fan, and it's just I think my call is more about, I guess, the gravity and the impact of what he did and his groundbreaking everything, that was about him. And I've just, seen an interesting flow, and, this also applies politically with the state of the country when he came out, and he was just a meteor. And I think a lot of people overlook a lot of kind of the comical stuff, or not. They focus too much on the comical stuff about the persona that he gets hung with a lot of the time. But I was at a party with some pretty diverse group of people. My wife is Jamaican, and a lot of black friends were there at the party. Started talking about something, and the black aspect of the music of Elvis Presley that he started off with, and I kind of had to jump in on. He took that music to another level, but he always kept that as his foundation. And there is not a pure voice that anybody can deny. And I put on actually one of his gospel tunes, and it kind of shut the room down. And I was like, this guy was the real deal, whether or not, the outside looking in would kind of try to tear him apart for, stealing a sound and, being a successful artist where there could be another black artist that was in that way. But I think he actually did more for unifying people and bringing people to the artists that, helped create his sound before he got there.
I mentioned, I mentioned earlier, Dick Clark wrote a book, and it's entitled, if you ever come across it, Rock, Roll, and Remember. And I was like, I got a phone interview. I didn't meet him, but he did a phoner with us. And we talked about exactly that. And Clark used to send those shows, and they would go south. And of course, the whole thing, you sit here and you sit here. But after, I think he said, a second or third show, then the black and white kids were sitting together.
Yeah.
And but even the term rock and roll is a black term for sexual intercourse, according to everything I've read. And I mentioned it earlier, one of my favorite groups, because I grew up on a radio station that's call letters were Whammo. It was a black station. Billy Ward and the Dominoes are really an important group. And they did a song called 60 Minute Man. And so, and Billy sings, I think I remember, I rock them and I roll them all night long. I'm a 60-minute man. Well, that's what he was talking about. And he was talking about, and Alan Freed, of course, takes that term and starts using, because there's rhythm and blues, and they called it race music, or there's jazz, there's ragtime, there's cowboy, there's country, there's folk, all that kind of stuff. But Alan Freed, that's why the heart of rock and roll is where? Well, it's in Cleveland, and that's right. That was one thing. I'm reading Freed's, and I mentioned this earlier, and it just froze me when I read it. So Freed graduates from high school, and this was I could have never had it in a million years. Freed graduates from high school in a place, Salem, Ohio, in 1940. And he puts a band together because he loves to play music, and he played a trombone. I never knew any of this. And for whatever it's worth, he named the band, are you ready for this? The Sultans of Swing.
All right.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
And so they named the band, he called the band in 1940, comes out of high school, and he forms this band, and he names it the Sultans of Swing. I
wonder how Mark Knopfler got a hold of that.
That's exactly what Kelly Michaels said this morning. And he said, remember, he said, we are the Sultans. We are the Sultans of Swing, which is a favorite tune of mine. But he was he wanted to be the band leader and the rest of it, but he ends up a DJ, and the rest is history. But, he was one of the guys that was on the take, he just did, he was Alan Freed. And
well, I think that's the point of Elvis, is that he created such a scene.
Thank you.
Everything that he did just, it just emanated out from him.
Yes, it did.
I mean, the style, the hairstyles, everything that was not supposed to be done, he was just undeniable with it. And I told my wife, I was like, there's no James Dean without this guy.
No.
There's no Steve McQueen without this guy.
No.
The culture of hot rods, the
all
look,
and I remember
coolness.
I'm old enough to remember. I mean, every single, and I'll tell you who else too, for whatever it's worth. Ric Flair, Slick Rick, and he's knocking off the original Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers.
They're right.
And no, I mean, so everybody's knocking somebody off someplace, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah. And his sound is just. It's the purest thing I think I know. I mean,
now, who was
Jimi Hendrix guitar?
Oh,
but the sound of Elvis's voice is, there's unbelievable.
Yeah, it, and it's just music means something, and I've told people that many times. I mean, it was part of rock and roll is to make you rebel against your parents.
Right.
Really,
right.
That's what part of its job was.
Right.
And I mentioned Hank Ballard. I was lucky enough to spend time with Hank Ballard, and Hank Ballard was a little guy, but he was Hank Ballard. He wrote the Twist. I mean, what are you going to do with him? And we sit down, and he's doing the show, and then we go eat breakfast together. And I said, "Can I tell you something?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "My father hated you." And he just cracked up. He was like,
But they all ended up loving him.
Oh, I did.
It's like the grandparents, they all said absolutely not.
No.
And then all of a sudden, after a while, the music started to speak for itself, and then they loved the guy.
And he was always, Porky played him, and they played Annie Had a Baby and Can't Work No More, and just all the great Hank hits. Well, no white boy top 40 station was going to play Hank, but we were on to Hank.
And kind of a side piece with all of this, the groundbreaking voices, you don't hear somebody that has that kind of ability to draw the two together until I don't know if you listen to Chris Stapleton too much.
Yeah.
But Chris Stapleton has got one of those voices that immediately that's him.
Yep.
And the funnest thing I do just killing time on the internet. Watch a YouTube video of a black reaction to Chris Stapleton.
Okay.
Black people love the man. He's done that same thing in an interesting area coming out of Kentucky with the bluegrass and the soul and a little bit of the rock in there. But it's a cool thing to kind of compare and see who might have that next kind of.
I'm getting a high sign. I got to pull a pin. Thanks, brother.
Have fun,
Thank you.
man.
You too. All right. Turn around now on 710 KNUS. Stevie Wonder, picking them up, laying them down. There you go. Mississippi. Stephen Moreland. Bob Lee knew him. 710 KNUS 47 the high. Final call, and we're taking Dan on line 3. All right. Hey, Dan, we got 3 minutes, and you are the final call of the afternoon. Thank you. You're up.
Yeah, Pete. Tommy James and the Shondells.
Mobbed up.
Yeah, big time. Roulette Records.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember Tommy James was still in high school when he came out with Hanky Panky? And he was in Michigan. And they ended up going to Pittsburgh, which is where he hooked up with the Shondells. I think it would have been about 65, 64.
Huh.
Do you remember him being around Pittsburgh at all?
I do not. No, I do not. Yeah.
Interesting.
But
yeah, they were going to college. The Shondells were a college band in Pittsburgh. And they were playing local places on the weekends and stuff, just to make tuition and whatnot. And then they went to New York, and that's when they got mobbed up. I believe it was a Genovese crime family that ran Roulette Records. But when they got to New York, every label wanted to sign them, MGM, Buddha, so on and so forth. And then they got a phone call from Roulette Records, and whoever was running Roulette Records for the Genovese crime family called up all the other record labels and said,
they're mine.
They're mine.
Fats Domino could never leave Vegas because he always owed them money.
Yeah.
There's all those stories. Yeah.
Yeah. And when they were recording for Roulette Records, they said that getting paid was like trying to get a bone away from a Doberman.
Well, you ever read this stuff about Chuck Berry? You had to pay Chuck in the front.
Yeah.
Chuck wouldn't, because he got screwed so many times.
Yeah, he got stiffed too much.
Yeah.
But I think Tommy James, he wrote a book about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. I read it, and it's all in there. It's a really good book.
I'll tell you what, real quick, because you're a reader, there's a book called H-I-T, Hitmen. Have you ever read that?
I haven't. I'll go check it out, though.
Hitmen, and it's about the record business and about how that worked. And then there's a new book out. I can't think of the name of it, but it's about the mob and music. And if you go back and look, we were talking about the mob and prize fighting. Guys like Frankie Carbo, that they ran prize fighting. What, you don't think they didn't run music?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. They were into it. And Tommy James in the book, he said that when he didn't write the book until they had all died.
They had to die. Oh,
yeah. Yeah, he had to wait. and so when he wrote the book, he said they still owed him about $30 or $40 million.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Listen, there's music. Thank you, Dan. You're a wonderful last call. Everybody, that was a show. That's what talk radio is supposed to be. Thank you, Adam Walker, for making it work. And Marshall Terrill. Home run. See ya. Have a good week.